standing, I'll invite the Mayor's Chaplain, Canon Sykes, to lead us in prayer.
Today is Ash Wednesday and marks the beginning of Lent in the Christian tradition. It's a time for reflection, reassessment and a spiritual spring clean in preparation for Holy Week and Easter. Whatever our faith, philosophy or none, it's also a good time to reflect on where we are and what we are. John Donne, that great Elizabethan poet, reminds us that no man is an island unto himself. So as we pray for this council, borough and people, we also pray for peace, where there is conflict, especially in the Ukraine, the Middle East and Africa. We also pray for the refugees in our midst, and those who fear for their lives, and for those struggling to make ends meet. So guide us, Lord, in all the decisions to be made tonight, that all may benefit and feel valued. Amen. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've noticed of a communication that Michael Jameson, the Council's Executive Director of Commissioning, is leaving after nearly 5 years' service the Council to take up a new position as Strategic Director of Children's Services at Bradford Council. And I would just like to say, on behalf of the Council and the people of Oldham, a sincere thank you to him. He's a nice chap who's had a very difficult job, and I'm sure we'll all wish him well and hope that he has a happy time. If not, I think it's impossible to be happier than he are at Oldham, but he's still got to make these decisions, so we hope he'll have as good a time as he's had at Oldham. Thank you. You may now be seated, and if you wish to remove your jackets, gentlemen and ladies, you may do so. I think this is very low. I don't know where we pump it up, but it's... Can Council please note, in accordance with the time limit set for Council meetings, a guillotine will be effective 3.5 hours after the start of this meeting, unless the Council agrees otherwise. And I would like to remind members that this meeting will be streamlined live on a webcast from the Council's website and will be recorded and available on the Council website. Apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Beeley, and I'm sad to report that it's because his son is very seriously ill, and I'm sure we'll all wish him a speedy recovery and send our best wishes to Councillor Beeley at this very difficult time for her. And from the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Hussain, who has found to become unwell just in the last few hours and is unable to be here. And Councillor Nigel Newton. I can't tell you why, but for best reasons he'll know why he can't be here. Declarations of interest. If you have a disclosable pecuniary interest, please raise your hand to declare. Right. The Standards Committee have given a dispensation allowing members who have an interest arising from their ownership or occupation of property in the Metropolitan Borough of Oldham to participate and vote on settling the council tax and matters directly related to such decisions, including the budget calculations. In addition, if you have a separate pecuniary, personal or prejudicial interest, please declare it now. Councillor McMahon and then Councillor Thompson. And if you'll... yes. So there are 3 people. And if you declare it on the form that comes round, do you want them to... Apparently, I think the legal officer would like you to say what your interest is. Start with Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. a personal interest in the leasehold at Chadderton Wellbeing Centre coffee shop.
Councillor Gary.
I've been asked to declare an interest because my husband works for Greater Manchester Police.
Councillor Thompson.
I'm not sure whether it'll be mentioned specifically, but older people's care will be discussed, and I'm a director of Oldham Care and Support, and Oldham Care and Support at home.
Councillor Actor.
Mr Mayor, I've got a commercial property where the lease is with the council.
You need to give the address.
Anyone else? No, all those have been noted. Oh, sorry, Councillor Harrison. That's personal. So you're all right. Yes, that isn't what. That's been waived, so you're all right. It's the other interests that have to be put on the form when they come round. In fact, everybody should sign the form when it comes round, and then Constitutional Services will have it down in writing that we've stuck to the letter of the law and that this meeting is lawful. Anyone else before we move on? The form is being circulated, I believe, around the council chamber. Has it got stuck anywhere? If it has, move it on. And we'll come to Budget 2014-15. Does Council agree to the suspension of Council Procedural Rule 10/7, rules to debate to enable the Leader of the Council to exceed the time limit for his contribution in moving the administration budget to 15 minutes and the Deputy Leader of the opposition group in moving the opposition budget a time limit of 10 minutes. All other speakers limited to 5 minutes. All in agreement, please show. Thank you. Does Council note the minutes of the Cabinet meeting held on the 24th of February 2014? Can I also inform members that due to recent regulations now implemented, requires the recording of votes on specific decisions at this budget meeting, and I will inform you when a recorded vote is required. I think we've got 5 occasions this evening, so we have to leave time for that. So anybody that whinges, whinge now, because we have to do it. Thank you. I'm not asking for your agreement because you've got to agree. Can I also inform members that recent regulations have been implemented requiring recorded votes? Well, I've told you all that now, so we're going to call Councillor McMahon to move and Councillor Jabbar to second the Treasury Management Strategy Statement Report 2014/15, including the Minimum Revenue Provision Policy Statement, Annual Investment Strategy and Prudential Indicators. Councillor McMahon.
I think you said it all, Mr Mayor. Move the report.
Seconded, Mr Mayor.
Does any member wish to speak? No? Does Council agree the recommendations as circulated? Those in favour, please show. Is there anyone against? Right. Are you happy with that? I call upon Councillor McMahon to move and Councillor Jabbar to second the Capital Strategy and Capital Programme 2014/18. Councillor McMahon.
Move the report, Mr Mayor.
Seconded, Mr Mayor.
Does any member wish to speak? All those in favour, please show. Is there anyone against? No, you're out. I call on Councillor Ibbott to move and Councillor Jabbar to second the Housing Revenue Account Estimates 2013-14, 2017-18. Councillor Hibbott.
Move, Mr Mayor.
Seconded, Mr Mayor.
Does any member wish to speak? All those who agree the recommendation, please show. Is there anyone against? Now, at this point, Councillor Ebbott has a right to reply, but there's nothing to reply to. I presume you're all happy with that, Councillor Ebbott? That is very unusual, but very welcome. Right, I call on Councillor McMahon to move and Councillor Jabbar to second the statement of Chief Financial Officer on reserves, robustness of the estimates and affordability and prudence of capital investments. Councillor McMahon.
Move the report, Mr Mayor. Seconded, Mr Mayor.
Councillor McMahon, I take it you don't exercise any right to reply? No. Does Council agree these recommendations? Is there anyone against? No. I call on Councillor McMahon to move and Councillor Jabbar to second the administration budget proposals 2014/15. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I rise, obviously, to move the budget as printed. Members will have a sheet coming around the council chamber which really is an illustration of the council's budget position, which I ask members to read. I know when met with a telephone directress eyes agenda, things sometimes can get lost, and we wanted to present the information in a transparent way that was easy for members to understand. That tells us a number of things, Mr Mayor. First of all, it tells us that the revenue support grant, which is a central government grant that this council gets, is reducing at a rate of knots. The government's determination is that councils eventually will be self-financing. That presents a particular issue for towns like Oldham, and let's face it, most towns north of Watford will be in the same situation, where we don't raise enough in council tax, we don't raise enough in business rates and other income to be fully self-financing. So when the revenue support grant is reduced to Oldham Council and to councils like us, it puts us in a very, very difficult position. Coupled with that, demand in a lot of places is going through the roof. So we know, despite government figures on job seekers allowance, unemployment is still a big issue in Oldham. And we know that that creates demand in the system that we have to respond to. We also know that nationally procured contracts, like the Work Programme Plus, just is not delivering. So we're backfilling that, and that's creating demand in the system. And of course, the ageing population. That creates a demand on the system, and because we want to treat our older people with dignity and with respect, of course, that means that there is costs incurred in doing that. So the message then is of a decline in revenue and increased cost, and that puts councils like Oldham in a very, very difficult position. What makes me particularly angry then is that in spite of all that, and let's be honest, we have handled well the cuts that have come so far. But in some ways, we've done ourselves a disservice. And there are too many councils that have got into a let's just do a good job mentality. That when a budget meeting like this comes, they pat themselves on the back and say, haven't we done a good job? I can tell you, I take no pleasure in moving this report. There is a lot of very difficult decisions in here, and we've got to be honest, it won't be without pain. The view we've taken is, it's better than the alternative. And the alternative is, if Oldham doesn't set its own budget, Eric Pickles and his civil servants will come into town and do it for us. And I can tell you what, they won't have a slightest care about the people in Oldham. So however difficult it is, it's more important that we do it than to allow somebody who is disconnected to Oldham to come into town and do it for us. But then when you see in the news that when we're making people redundant, when we're taking money from services, when at some point we will be saying no to people that come to the council for help, you read taxpayer-owned, Royal Bank of Scotland, making £8 billion of loss, seems quite content at paying £500 million out in bonuses. That's nearly £10 for every man, woman and child handed over to the bankers that created a financial meltdown that means that this council is making the reductions that we're making. Well, that's what the government would have you believe, that the reason why public sector spend is being cut for local authorities is because of the national financial crash that came in 2008. Unfortunately, the evidence tells us a different story. And what the evidence tells us is, for every pound that's been taken from local government, around £1.10 has gone for Department for Work and Pensions and for the acute trusts. Failure demand, people out of work, ill people, where prevention has been taken out of the front line and they're presenting to hospitals. Or older people who aren't being able to be discharged from hospital in the right amount of time are now blocking beds and taking those beds up. And I think government really underestimate how local government is the answer to public service. They forget that the prevention agenda is where we've been at. And actually, when you take that money away, it does add pressure further on. And that's the cruelty of all this, really, Mr. Mayor, that every penny that's been taken from the council hasn't gone off to pay the national deficit, and people will take their own view about that. It's actually gone to pay for failure. But there's still a disconnection, isn't there? Because we can have that conversation, and I think the Manchester Evening News did a fantastic job at just articulating where the money was going in two ways. First of all, national distribution of local government spend showed very clearly that although mainly Labour authorities in areas of deprivation we have seen a cut, wealthier authorities, generally controlled by Conservative councils, are actually seeing an increase. So money taken from Labour authorities and given straight across to Tory authorities. And the same can be translated through to the Fire Authority, where money is being taken from Greater Manchester Fire Authority and given to Cheshire. You can translate that through to Greater Manchester Police, where millions are being taken out of the budget, and some of it is going to the City of London Police. There is an active redistribution from poorer areas to wealthier areas. This isn't by accident. This isn't a consequence of a fair settlement and we just ended up on the bad side of that. This is a very determined Tory government, supported unfortunately by the Liberal Democrats, that are creating a situation where towns like Oldham are being kicked. But we wouldn't be leaders of the place if we didn't look beyond the council chamber and look at what's going on in Oldham. Don't believe the job seekers allowance numbers. That is not a fair representation of the number of people who are out of work in Oldham. Through universal credit, we estimate up to 2,000 more people are out of work than the government are claiming. We've asked the government, to be honest, to merge the figures so we know the people who we need to help, and they won't tell us. And when we keep demanding, and then they do tell us, it's 3 months out of date, 4 months out of date, which means it's very hard for a town and a council that want to help to get to the people who we're talking about trying to help. We know through welfare reform that families are struggling in Oldham, and that's why we've taken the decision here to freeze council tax. That wasn't easy. Despite what the government say, they have not funded the council tax freeze. They've funded a proportion of the council tax freeze. But we've taken the view that in a town like Oldham, where wages are going down, and they have gone down from about £437 a week to £417 a week, that it would be wrong for us to add more pressure onto those families who are already affected by welfare reform, by the bedroom tax, by council tax localisation, and of course, the increased cost of living. So we hope that people in Oldham see that being good stewards of the public purse in Oldham, we are able to put ourselves in a position where we can help people who need the help the most. Coupled with that, we aren't just about managing decline in Oldham, and I think this has been the trademark that other people have looked on and seen something a bit different. So where other towns are managing decline, are actually quite negative about the future of their place, some actually offering it up as a destitute and a place that's going downhill very fast. We're doing the opposite in Oldham. And we really do need cross-party support for this. The decisions that we are taking to create jobs, to regenerate Oldham, and to deal with the Oldham to-do list, as we call it, need strong stomach. This isn't easy, but it's absolutely essential. The alternative to not invested in Oldham is more unemployment, another generation lost, and a town going downhill when we believe Oldham deserves better than that. And the challenge is there because in the alternative budget, which we'll come on to in a short while, there are some real question marks about whether the group opposite have got the stomach to see regeneration through, or whether you're willing to offer it up as a political pawn. And there's a real challenge there, Are we serious about putting Oldham above politics? Or really, when it comes to the crunch, are we going to go back into the gutter? I don't think people in Oldham would forgive us for that. I think people in Oldham have reflected on Oldham Council and seen that it's matured, that it has taken light of what's going on in the town, and projects, and let's face it, would a council be doing the old town hall and the cinema and the restaurants in another town? In Oldham, it's vital. If we don't deal with the symbols of decline that people can talk about and point to and say, that's why I'm not happy to live in Oldham, that's why my children want to leave Oldham. If we don't deal with that, we have no hope at all of coming out of this recession in one piece. And there is still a recession for towns like Oldham. There might be a boom in London, but they will do, given how much public subsidy goes towards London. In towns like Oldham, we're still feeling the ripples of 2008. And while we're here feeling the pain, the bankers are popping champagne in the city, and we're paying them for the privilege. And that's the cruelty of the situation that we're in. But our vision for Oldham, what we're doing with the town hall, the restaurants, the cinema, the hotel and conferencing, they're not just schemes. It's a statement. It's a statement of intent. And it's a statement that says Oldham will be that great town that it once was. It'll be different. It won't be the same. It won't be mills after mills, and it won't be people employed in menial occupations. It'll be different, but we all need to get behind that and to support it. So this budget isn't in itself good news. There's some real terrible decisions that have had to be taken in here, but we've reflected on the alternatives, unfortunately, being worse. We don't want to be in this position. It was not people in Oldham who created the financial mess, but it is us who are picking up the pieces and paying the price. The most important thing, though, is as civic leaders, as councillors who have stood on an election platform and said, people, put your trust in us, that we deliver on that trust. That when the test comes and the cuts have had to be made, we make them, but we don't do that at the cost of creating the Oldham that people demand. I'm very proud to be a member of the Combined Authority. I'm very proud that Oldham really has stepped up to the plate, and I would say we are one of the strongest contributors to that relationship. But I don't want Oldham to be the poor relation. I don't want us to be the low-skilled, low-wage bit of Greater Manchester where people on low incomes live by default. I think we can be better than that. Our point of difference in Greater Manchester is we're the gateway to the Pennines. 70% of our borough in some of the most beautiful parts of England. We should celebrate that. We should be saying to Greater Manchester that we are absolutely the place to invest. But if we don't deal with the symbols of decline and negativity, when the investors come, they'll turn round and they'll leave. Mr. Mayor, I do hope Council will get behind this budget. I do hope people will step back and reflect that even in difficult times, we are given the vision and the leadership that Oldham has needed for such a long time. And I do hope that regardless of the alternative budget that's been set, that when the time comes, cross-party, we get behind what is a budget for Oldham. Thank you.
Councillor Jabbar to second, and I'll remind Councillor Jabbar we're now on 5 minutes, unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I rise to formally second the administration budget. In doing so, I do it with a heavy heart, Mr. Mayor, because it actually means taking out £23 million from our revenue budget for 14-15, and it actually means we have to take out 168 posts in order to produce a balanced budget. And this is on the backdrop of a saving of £120 million that has been taken out from the council budget in the 5-year to March 2015, and that equates to 1,077 posts. That's 1,077 posts has been lost in the 5 years in this borough from this authority. And the majority of those people would have been actually a resident of this authority, this borough. And it is totally unacceptable. But as the leader said, Mr. Mayor, we're charged with producing a balanced budget, and it would be completely irresponsible not to do so. And that's why the figures are here before you tonight. And the point is this: some of the proposals that we brought here, we wouldn't want to bring it, but we're forced to do it given the cutbacks that we're facing from central government. I just want to pick up on a few of the things in terms of details. So this is not the end. if you remember when the coalition government came in, George Osborne in his opening comprehensive spending review actually said this time we would have balanced the budget and we would have got rid of the deficit, and hopefully there wouldn't be any further cuts. But actually, if you look at the projections, and we know the numbers for next year, 15-16, then 15-16, 16-17, we require another £60 million of saving to be found from ever reducing grants from the government. So I'm afraid it is a very, very challenging situation. So despite that, in terms of the resources that's available to us, Mr. Mayor, I can tell you that we have managed that very prudently. As the leader explained, we have not increased the council tax despite the pressure on us from the cuts that we've had from central government. We managed to review the council tax support scheme and actually change it and reduced the contribution that people have to pay from 25 to 20%. We're aiming to produce a balanced budget. And I know some people in this chamber have asked the question about, well, the monitoring report is saying an projected overspend, and therefore we've lost complete control of our finances. Utter nonsense. I can assure you that the management of the finances in this authority is very robust. In fact, if you look at some of our competitors, competitor council or comparison council or SITFA, they're actually praising Oldham Council for the way that we manage our budget. So if you take the way we close the accounts, first in the country by a long stretch, and hopefully 13-14 budget will actually be published on the 28th of May 2014. And if we're able to achieve this date, then it will be the first council to do so in 50 years. There are also examples, Mr. Mayor, where SITFA are coming to us for advice on many financial matters. And I'm incredibly proud of that. And I want to take the opportunity now to thank our Chief Executive, Caroline Wilkins, Stephen Mayer, Emma, Michael, Elaine, and all the team who work with them to make sure the financial position is what it is. And it is a lot of work that people do on our behalf. So if you look at some of the other issues then, Mr. Mayor, for example, adult care, I know people have said, well, adult care is overspending, but what people haven't appreciated, it's not the old adult care. Within the last 4 years, from the adult care budget, we have taken out 18.5 million. Now, historically in this authority, spending in adult care has never been controlled. But not only have we controlled it, we've actually taken 18 million pound out. And on top of that, the demand has been increasing because people are living longer. We have seen an increase in the number of disabled people living longer. We have seen an increase in people with dementia. All those things actually cost an enormous amount of money to this authority. Despite that, we're able to manage the budget. And finally, Mr. Mayor, the issue about the capital program, as the leader said, it is required, but the money that we spend on capital program is recouped through business rate and council tax.
Is that right, Councillor? I was just about to say you'd have to wind up in 30 seconds, but you were very quick. You
well, 30 seconds. I'll take 30 seconds if I may, Mr. Mayor. The issue about the capital program.
Maybe extension, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, the issue about the capital program, yes, it's 105 million. The borrowing cost for that is about £7 million. But if you look at what we get in return for that, just in terms of council tax and business rate, is far more than the £7 million. And therefore, it makes perfect sense for us to engage in that activity and invest in the future of this borough. Thank you. I'm happy to second this administration budget.
Thank you. We now come to the Amendment 1, and I call upon Councillor McCann to move and Councillor Sykes to second the amendment to the budget as circulated and detailed in the Council summons. Councillor McCann, you've got 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, as the first opposition speaker, shall we say,
I'd like to congratulate Councillor McMahon on his award as Council Leader of the Year. And I think his comments, I think it reflects well on Oldham, and I think it reflects well actually on the whole officer corps of Oldham, and indeed on the council itself, which I think does have a good record of council support. Mr. Mayor. Sorry? No? The size of the Green Book, in a way, which is notably thick, reflects the size of the financial problems facing local authorities. It is large. Realistically, there is little room for manoeuvre within the total budget available. So we hope we've been constructive with our suggestions, accepting that the majority of the administration budget proposals are inevitable. Many of us here do not want to carry through or see these proposals. It is not what we came into local government for, but we're forced into them. So we offer suggestions in a positive spirit rather than just negative opposition. As an opposition, it is our duty, in fact, to question, examine and offer alternatives. And indeed, Councillor Jabbar at the last Cabinet on the 24th of February said, it is right for people to question, and he welcomed them. And I agree with him, and it's good to hear. So Oldham, Mr. Mayor, has a long and productive tradition of cooperation and consensus working with cross-party support, putting the interest of the borough first and enabling major schemes to progress to the advantage of all. Indeed, at the Cabinet of the 24th of February, Councillor McMahon noted the cross-party representations to government regarding the Royton and Crompton School, repairs and funding required for those repairs, and it's the latest in a long, long list. And I think Oldham has a very good record of cross-party working. Our budget list, therefore, offers suggestions that we feel help the finances and perhaps the most vulnerable in Oldham. And the two groups we especially think of in our borough are the elderly, especially those in care schemes, and notably those in the extra care schemes, and our children in care, and those just leaving the care cycle. We have found some 333,000 to make available to our hard-pressed care services to be used on the areas of greatest pressure and need during the transition period of the service provision. The changes are needed, have to be done, but we do think that this money might help ease that transition. For instance, there are hard choices facing some of the residents in extra care housing, with estimates of the number of people that will require individual help and advice at between 5 and 50. If it's 50, you need a lot more money than for 5. It's a big range of resource that will be needed to handle those people and help them. Adult services are under tremendous pressure, and this proposal would help ease the transition problems, although it is accepted that the money from reserves was properly used to support an emergency position. We're not arguing about that. This is about trying to help that short period, we think, where some people will have particular problems. In children's services, we're particularly concerned for the safety and security of children in council care and the care leavers, especially given the serious cases of abuse uncovered in recent years and worryingly still being found today. Abuse does not stop at a borough's borders. We would not want to see the headlines about Oldham similar to Rochdale's. It is a fact that during a change of services, there is a higher possibility of error or someone being lost within that system. The links break. So much of the good work depends with the young people on personal links, personal contact, the trust they build up one-to-one. And the money we are offering would help support this change period. We also found 175,000 for additional gully cleaning teams. That's sludge gulpers, Councillor Hull. And we had to find over £500,000 when we came into the administration for digging out completely blocked culverts and grids. So to us, it is actually cheaper to use jetters and keep these things clear rather than have a problem build up, and then in 3 or 4 years, you have to find some major sums of money to clean them. The floods shown on TV show what happens when the drains aren't maintained, but that's Somerset, or is it? But my comment is it also affects road safety. If you have water running over the surface of the road, you're more likely to have accidents, and it also degrades the road surface more quickly. Litter and fly tipping. We fully support this administration's prosecutions on those who litter and fly tip. And we will put money into a period of 12 months hard enforcement and cleaning up. The responsible majority of people in Oldham are fed up with the few who despoil our streets and alleys and the countryside with commercial and domestic refuse. And those who just drop the odd packet or stub end, they're unacceptable as well. So we think, and we fully support the drive of the administration to lift Oldham, to get it into a classier place. But actually it doesn't help if the streets are dirty and people are just round dropping litter all over the place. There's got to be social responsibility. We would fund our proposals by accepting the 200,000 saving proffered by the management, as there is a reduction in salary costs from vacant senior posts. And we're surprised actually that this hasn't been accepted eagerly. We're also reviewing the terms of the street lighting contract, and I know Councillor Hibbert is doing work on that, and there is work undergoing on it. But we do feel that if the contract is looked at, modernised, some of the things are questioned, and why aren't we using LED technology now it's more reliable, this will save costs. Edinburgh, for instance, with a cost of over £2 million for doing the street lighting, have gone to LED systems where possible, and they're saving 40%. That's a massive saving. So could we look at that and build it into the contract that's already under review? I think it's a notable thing that actually most complaints about the new street lighting are about them being too bright. So again, as Councillor Hibbert said, a pilot was successful in turning that down. We're suggesting we could take 43,000 from ceasing the paper issue of the Borough Life and its delivery by Royal Mail. Some will debate this, and is it the most efficient way of communicating? And I had a quick look actually at Jim's blog, and he was saying how 86% of people nowadays have used the internet. How ways of communication are changing. Is this a good use 4 times a year to actually get the council's message across? Are there better ways of doing it? And now we come to the capital programme where we're saying we can 253,000. Let's make it clear, we are not opposing the capital programme. We voted for it. We are not saying don't do it. What we are saying is there are inbuilt slippages in this programme. And indeed at the meeting, the cabinet meeting, Councillor Dubar said that the capital programme was well managed, accepted, and he said there was some significant slippage, which is also what we're hearing, that there is slippage in various places. So as a result of this slippage, we are suggesting that the slippage be quantified, the amounts of money be quantified, and we offered Royton as an example where the officers looked at it, because it's one of the smaller schemes actually. But it's important that people understand, we're not saying do not carry out regeneration, we're not saying do not do these schemes. What we are saying is that there is 105 million capital allocated to the programme. It is £7 million from revenue to fund that. And I take your point about business rates, and I take the point about jobs. But until actually those places are built and paying rates, there's no income. And until the people are in those places and working, there isn't an income or a job. So for a couple of years, there is what I would call a window of opportunity, whereby looking at the actual rate of spend and the money prudently allocated in reserves to fund it, do you actually have some room there for manoeuvre for some of the most troubled areas we have? And I would suggest they will be youngsters in care or the elderly. Our concerns, therefore, is that given the sums involved, if just one major project runs into difficulties, the whole borough could be in difficulty. Hotel Future has some £30 million of council funding committed to it.
Councillor McCann, if you could have 30 seconds.
Sorry, thank you. The new Coliseum has 21. Yeah, and the town centre has 15.
Move extension, Mr. Mayor.
These are large sums of money, and I do think that actually fairly small delays that are inbuilt in the programme could actually give revenue relief to this council. I do think that there are other areas that we could look at. It's an ambitious regeneration programme, and we fully support it. We don't actually think that new statues are a good idea at this moment, but public realm is part of something we would support. And finally, there is a suggestion that we review the number of councillors. No figure in this budget, but we float it forward. Staff numbers have been reduced. People out there say to us, there's an awful lot of councillors, why aren't we looking what you cost? I think it's time we looked at what we do cost. Can we be made more efficient? Actually, do we work in the most efficient way? And finally, I'm very pleased that the administration has taken advantage of there being government funding to help support there being no council tax rise in Oldham. I do agree it's inappropriate to increase pressure on the people of Oldham. I would like to thank the officers from the finance section for their professionalism and help, and the fact that it's a robust and deliverable alternative budget from our esteemed Section 151 officer. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your...
Thank you, Councillor McCann, for being so prompt. Councillor Sykes to second, and we're back to 5 minutes. Councillor Sykes.
Rough. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to second the budget tonight. Thank my colleague for his contribution. And I said last year in the budget debate that this is a time for plain speaking. Well, 12 months on, it's more difficult, or if you could even argue it's a time for even plainer speaking. We're the opposition. We recognise the financial situation for this local authority in particular remains very difficult. The local government financial settlement for the coming year represented, I would describe it as a curate's egg, perhaps. Maybe it was better than we anticipated, and that doesn't mean it were good, but bad in the sense that its late announcement was not helpful at all in locking into council budgets as quickly or as efficiently as possible, and I do hope that doesn't happen again. It's to the credit of the administration and our executive management team and finance officers that once again further savings have been found. But let's be clear tonight that the opposition will be full square behind the administration in imposing further cuts in local government finance that impact upon these core services. Services such as refuse collection, education of children, the caring of our young, disabled, vulnerable and elderly. Also preserving our libraries and parks, and I think we've actually got off that debate now, for learning, reflection, enjoyment and exercise, and I think there is a, for small, relatively small amounts of money, an agreement that those are particularly important to our residents. Liberal Democrat group is adamant that local government, and Oldham in particular, has shouldered more than its fair share of budget cuts to put right the financial shambles we inherited from the last Labour government. Labour colleagues, well, you're going to get it, aren't you? Because I could have bet what you just said, and you know there'll be more of it tonight, and then it'll be 9:30, and then we'll go home. Labour colleagues often say that we on this side of the chamber should take the message to government ministers and to fight tooth and nail for a fair shake of local government. Let me say so again and put it on the record. We do it loud and clear, and I'm very much a bore these days in championing Oldham's corner when I get that opportunity, as do a number of my colleagues on occasions as well. We'll continue to support the administration in finding savings by reducing red tape, improving working practices, making efficient use of office accommodation and streamlining staff structures. We'll also look at eliminating unnecessarily spending items such as town centre statues, town hall Pravda publications, £3,000 twice on carpets for councillors' offices, as well as the big things. It's the little things that matter just as much as the big things. use it especially to free up money for those frontline services, improve the life chances of our most vulnerable citizens and the overall quality of life of our residents. Tonight, Councillor McCann has proposed savings to release cash to deliver better services for our looked after children and frail elderly, and also to help remove litter and clear gullies, so improving footpaths and streets. I hope councillors opposite will support our modest though meaningful proposals, including locking in savings that accrue from delays on certain projects in the capital investment programme. Labour will tonight make much of its commitment to a council tax freeze. This is very welcome on our side of the chamber, but more importantly, it will be very welcome by hard-pressed ratepayers and council taxpayers. Remember, we called for a more modest increase last year, but those pleas were ignored. Council tax freeze is only possible as a result of an offer by the coalition government of additional financial help. And I accept it's not the whole package, but it is some of it. It's a pity then that when that money was offered last year, Labour chose not to accept the cash then. Instead, Oldham has had to find nearly 4% increase to meet Labour's council tax bombshell when you took in all the other authorities apart from the council as well. An increase in council tax way above the rate of inflation and certainly way above any pay increases, as the leaders spoke about in terms of true value, that are reflected in the local economy. This coupled in particular with a draconian scheme for limited local council tax support has meant some real hardship for the poor. But that was last year and there wasn't an election, and this year there is an election and therefore it's different. Since May last year, as the main opposition party, we've been proposing practical measures that this council could adopt to better support the poorest and most vulnerable of our residents and to adjust the impact of welfare reform. It's included a 12-point plan to support disabled residents, the use of the windfall bumper airport dividend and monies from a buoyant housing revenue account to support the poorest council taxpayers and tenants, and better use of our social housing stock. I hope in the continuing financial year we can continue these discussions and make better use of the discretionary housing payments and local welfare fund granted to us by the government for this purpose. The Liberal Democrats stand ready...
Councillor Sachs, could you finish in 30 seconds, please? Thank you. Yes, I know that. It's to that I've responded and given everybody the same. So I've been fair with everybody.
The extension. Sorry, can I seek clarification on that? It's a minute.
I thought I'd been fair by asking everybody to stick, particularly when a lot of members from all the parties have asked me, wishing to not be too late tonight. So I've tried to be fair, and I think if you can wind up now, it will be fair, because I've got 19 people wishing to speak.
Have I got a minute to speak, Mr. Mayor, or not? That's my question.
Yes. Yeah.
Could have done it by now.
And we spent 3 minutes.
No, they cut me off. Okay, I'll carry on then, Mr. Mayor. A minute from now then. Liberal Democrats stand ready to do everything we can to ensure the money goes to those people in greatest need. So far I've talked about financial constraints in the council's budgets and in the personal budgets of those who rely on welfare benefits. Anybody could think in Oldham it's not rosy and that our council is merely managing its own decline in a benefit-dependent town that's itself going downhill. But it's not so, and we mustn't talk down our town and our borough. This council, with its hard-working and dedicated staff, continue to deliver, in spite of the financial position, high-quality, responsive and innovative services, and these are often award-winnings. Personally, I find it gratifying to see projects begun under my leadership coming to fruition, such as Metrolink in the town centre, the transformation of the town hall, and some other things around social housing. In turn, these projects bring much-needed apprenticeships and jobs to our borough. It is vital that, for the most, that it's the most popular route out of poverty and employment. I'm still not convinced we're getting the maximum opportunities out of these schemes in our borough, and we must redouble our efforts together to do that. So I close, congratulate the leader and his Labour colleagues on the continuing good work of the previous administration, but echo my colleague Councillor McCann's note of caution. I vote for the opposition's budget amendments will deliver a meaningful improvement in those services most need, and let us continue our party working on projects that matter most to our citizens we serve. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Mayor.
you, sir. Just to clarify, I'm apologetic. I didn't realise we were doing the 30 seconds for 2 months and we've gone back to the 1 minute. But being as you've had 1.5, you've done well. Right, we'll start on these 19 people, and there's no whinging because there's so many of you put the hands up at the same time. I've tried to get them in order of how you moved or coughed or indicated. And we start with Councillor Akhtar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to speak against the amendment. No surprise there at all. Let me clarify a couple of issues that Councillor Sykes and McCann mentioned. On this side, we might have spent a few £1,000s on new carpets, but when Councillor Sykes became the leader, he refurbished and relocated his office at a cost of almost £15,000. And the only statue that we've got in this borough, that is in Shore District Partnership, and that cost £60,000. I'll move on to the budget now, Mr. Mayor. We have a budget in front of us, which is only 0.28% of the total budget. It's been put together on the back of a fag packet. It's short-sighted as usual. Half of the budget proposal is a one-year saving from the capital expenditure, which adds a pressure on future years as well. It's not gone through the proper scrutiny process. The Lib Dems have done no consultation with the general public out there, but within their narrative, they believe in consultation, but they don't preach what they practice. The amendments show you are simply the amendments today in terms of the size of the budget. It just shows that you're actually running out of ideas. You have no vision for our borough. It's a bit like the vision of your party, on which I'll comment on shortly. The opposition group were asked to work with us on the budget, but they didn't take up the offer. On budget items FVP 13, 103 and 203, the Lib Dems had the opportunity to propose a recommendation on our budget if they felt an extension of 3 months was crucial. But they made no recommendation. A missed opportunity? Or is it mischief making tonight when proposing it tonight, may I ask? On the opposition budget D001 of stopping the publication of Borough Life, it's an easy budget option when you're actually not in control, as you don't have anything worthwhile to tell to the public, but we do. We have a duty to inform our residents on a regular basis. Mr. Mayor, now I'll move on to the narrative of the report in section 1 on page 4. The Lib Dems are trying to take credit for initiatives that we've clearly started, but hey-ho, never mind. Everyone wants to be on the bandwagon when things are going well. But what makes my blood boil is section 2. Here, Mr. Mayor, they have the nerve to include the vision of their party. It makes my stomach churn. If this is not utter hypocrisy, then what is? In layperson's terms, this is something else, but I don't say it in this meeting, but it starts with bull. You talk about improving the life chances of citizens and young people and protect the vulnerable. Mr. Mayor, I'll go through their achievements on this, or shall I say, the broken promises and failure trophies of the Lib Dems that they hold. Welfare reforms. The latest figures collected by Oxfam suggest nearly 1 million people have been sanctioned, deprived of all benefits for 1 month for the first infringement, 3 months for the second, and 3 years for the third in the past 15 months. There are now at least 345 food banks right across the country, and numbers using them now are over 500,000. £90 million has been taken out of the local economy in Oldham on an annual basis, and that's had a ripple effect right across the whole borough. Bedroom tax. The spare room subsidy affects 660,000 people right across the UK. In February last year, MPs had the last chance to vote against the bedroom tax before it became into force in April. Not a single Tory or Lib Dem MP voted against it. A survey last month from the National Housing Federation claims 2/3 of households in England affected by the bedroom tax have fallen into arrears. DCLG figures show that over 2,000 families have been placed in emergency bread and breakfast accommodation after losing their homes. How much is this costing us? Work capability assessments. Opening a Commons debate in January, Oldham Labour MP Michael Meacher revealed government figures show that since WCA started, 1,300 people had died after being placed in the work-related activity group. For those currently too ill to be in a job but expected to take steps towards an eventual return to employment, Some 2,200 died before the assessment process was completed. 7,100 died after being placed in the group for those entitled to unconditional support as they are too ill or disabled to work. If this is not corporate manslaughter, then what is? Child poverty. I'll move on. Lib Dems promised to maintain the goal of ending child poverty in the UK by 2020. The number of children living in poverty has leapt by 300,000 under the coalition government in the 3 years from 2010 to 2013. There are now 3.5 million children living in poverty in the UK today. That's 27% of children, more than 1 in 4. Is this what you call increase?
All those in favour of extension? 1 minute.
Is this what you call increasing life chances of our young people? Fees. Lib Dems promised to oppose any increase in university tuition fees. The coalition government lifted the cap on tuition fees from 3,000 to 9,000 in 2012. In the first year this was brought in, university applications dropped by 8.7%. Is this how you protect the vulnerable? All this has happened under your watch and under your government. It's a shame that you don't practice what you preach. Shame on you. I urge the members to vote against the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, before I call the next people, we haven't time for that. Before I call on the next people, could I remind you to stick to the budget and, if possible, be fair. There's 23 people wish to speak, and they will only get the chance to do so if people are succinct. So the next one to speak is Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm a bit bothered about Councillor Akhtar. Maybe he'd feel a little bit less nauseous if he took into account the about £700 a year put into people's pockets by the reduction in income tax and all the people taken out of tax. However, to the budget. Councillor McCann has done an extremely creditable job with this. First of all, it is much bigger than it looks. You try and talk it down. But the main savings are what you call starters for 10. The reduction in councillors will save a lot more than the basic allowances. There are all sorts of expenses and a third of local election costs. On a much bigger scale, the savings in repayments on borrowing is based only on one sample project and 1 year's delay. We know it will be delayed at least 2 years. And the last 2 weeks have seen other projects delayed. Cabinet revealed a major setback in the Town Hall redevelopment. And Councillor Jabbar's admitted that a new delay in the Hotel Future project. These projects involve massive sums which dwarf the council spending in Royton, so the savings very much a sampler. And before you misrepresent me, I'm sure you will, the delays are extremely disappointing to me and to the borough. I want shiny new facilities. I want a thriving borough as much as anyone. But budgets need basing on facts, not wishful thinking of what you can get done. Money you know won't be needed should be put on the table and not stashed in the council's back pocket. The real reason the budget's remarkable is not about the sums involved. Councillor McCann has challenged the very budget headings the leader of the council sought to declare out of bounds, namely interest payments, management salaries and councillors. Councillor McCann's proved that these budgets are anything but fixed. Interest on borrowing, repayments, it's where the big numbers are. So Councillor McMahon several times in my hearing declared interest as fixed. You can't do anything about it, and so on. That might be so if we were talking about past borrowings, but the Labour administration's been increasing the council's total indebtedness each year. Over 3 years, they've increased the capital financing requirement, that's the official measure of debt, by 40%. Tonight's handout's very pretty, but it gives you only some selected types of debt. The capital financing requirement's what it's about, the official one, and it's on page 23. In real numbers, it tells you that capital spending has gone up 197 million. That's not far off £1 million for every man, woman and child in the borough. £1 million extra. On that measure, the extra repayments, different period from Councillor McCann's, are about £13 million a year, 6 million of it in the coming year. If Councillor McCann can identify £250,000 this year from delays on £3.5 million of the projects, what might he find across all the big projects which are slipping back? Then there's 200,000 in senior management salaries. That exists. But like the interest, the administration's leaving it in the back pocket. It's absolutely wrong to keep the interest and the management savings in the back pocket while stripping out £9 million from adults and children's services this year alone, when you can mitigate the impact on the vulnerable. Just plain wrong. As for reducing councillors, I predict that you will have to listen to the public eventually. The public said this every year for a long time, and it is their money. We should listen. So I think this shows sound money. I'll come back to what I said before. You will misrepresent it, I'm absolutely certain, as saying we shouldn't spend this money. I'm not saying that, but you haven't asked the public. Of course the public's going to say, yes, we'd love a new swimming pool, we'd love a new theatre, we'd love new cinema, whatever. But when you spend your own money, I'd like that, it'll cost this, you balance it. You haven't asked the public about that money. But get it on the table. Well done, Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson, for staying within the time. Councillor Hoole.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I speak against the opposition amendment. This alternative budget can only be described as delay, 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 let's save it for a rainy day. Delay to the changes in adult social care, which aim to improve the utilisation of extra care housing. Delay to putting in place measures aimed at providing mentoring for vulnerable young people who are aftercare leavers. And delay to the capital investment in Royton Town Hall. This particular proposal aims to capitalise on delaying the scheme rather than pulling out the stops to keep it on track. Mr. Mayor, on page 707 at 7.1, we're told that the public expects the fullest possible consultation before and during the formulation of budget options. I doubt very much whether there was any consultation with the Royton members, let alone the public, on a proposal to delay the long overdue Royton Town Hall and its surrounding development. I just don't believe it. My reference to a rainy day is because part of the justification for investing in gully cleaning, or sludge gulpers as I like to call them, would, in the event of a flood, be dealt with more quickly. Mr. Mayor, I'm not aware of any event, any flooding event in the borough that has not been dealt with swiftly under the existing arrangements. It's just a luxury we can't afford. Mr. Mayor, on page 701 at 2.2, we're told that the Liberal Democrats exist to build and safeguard a fair, free and open society, and it ends in one which no one shall be enslaved in poverty, ignorance or conformity. It is sheer hypocrisy. The opposition amendment proposes ceasing the production and distribution of the Borough Life newsletter. Okay, by doing so, they effectively leave our residents in ignorance of what the council is doing. So that's one of their own values shot down in flames by none other than themselves. I suggest that the creative way in which this administration is forced to make coalition government impose cuts is something the Lib Dems can't cope with and doesn't want it publicised. It's like the Cooperative Council. They just don't like it, do they? They don't like it. Moreover, Mr. Mayor, we've significantly improved our satisfaction rates because we inform our residents. The Lib Dems failed to suggest a realistic and acceptable alternative. Wait for it. Perhaps they're going to advocate training for bin men as town criers. You never know. Mr. Mayor, this opposition amendment advocates a reduction of councillors from 60 to 40. And perhaps we could start with 14, a reduction of 14, and let us get on with dealing with the tsunami of challenges and cuts that the coalition government is forcing on local government. Manchester Evening News last night, 26 of the 28 hardest hit councils are Labour controlled. Need I say more? Mr. Mayor, the opposition amendment raises concerns over the £105 million capital budget and the ongoing £7 million annual repayment costs if all of this was committed. There's potential here for a GVA of £500 million with this investment. It also fails to recognise that this level of investment creates jobs, housing, shops and development, all which will generate business, rates and extra money in the local economy. It's all about regeneration to create income. The Lib Dems have presented a one-sided argument which only serves to mislead. Mr Mayor, on page 705, just above 4.4, Grant Thornton, the auditors, have looked at our total level of debt and their conclusion, we are satisfied that the risks are being addressed and there is no adverse effect on our value for money conclusion. That's what the auditors are saying about all of this. There is no adverse effect. Mr Mayor, I put it to you that delay, let's save it for a rainy day, is not the way forward for Oldham. And on that basis, I urge members to vote against the amendment. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Hoole, if you ever want a testimonial to be the town crier, you'll get it from me. And now I move on to Councillor Jabbar, followed by Councillor Blythe.
Thanks very much, Mr Mayor. Where do I start? Let's just put this in perspective. So the budget for 14-15 is around 216 million. The proposal here is 603,000, which is 0.28% of the total. And now it gets better, Mr Mayor. Out of that, 253,000 is one-off saving from the Royton regeneration project. That's 42% of the entire proposal of Lib Dem. And that's a one-off saving. Now, Mr Mayor, if the administration went to the Borough Treasurer and said, oh, Steve, we found a proposal for you, and by the way, half of this one-off, I would be laughed out of his office to say it's not viable. Now, that's what the opposition has done, brought forward a proposal. 42% is one-off saving. Now, what does that do? It actually increases the pressure in following year. And as you know, 15, 16, 16, 17, we need to find £60 million. Now then, let's just look at this in a bit more detail. So he's asking, postpone this £3.6 million development for 12 months, 6 to 12 months. So if you do that, what happens? You save around £250,000. But actually, Mr Mayor, if you look at it, business rate, we would get actually £336 1 year if we actually complete that scheme, okay? To remember this, the figure is 253 that we're saving, but 1 year business rate is £336,000. It gets better. The interest rate, Bank of England and the Governor of Bank of England is talking about actually increasing it. So say in 1 year time, it increased by 1%. Guess what the repayment, increased repayment is for this project over 25 years? It's £500,000. So if you put the two together, it's actually £736, £736,000, okay? That would be the loss to this project from the proposal that's been put forward by the opposition. So if you take the 253 away from the 736, you're left with a £483,000 net loss to the council for the proposal that's been put in by the Lib Dems in their opposition. Now, John, in your opening speech, you actually said this is going to help the finances of the authority, your proposal. I just like somebody from your side to explain how, when I've given you the figures, that your proposal will actually help the finances of this authority. It is utterly nonsense. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's short-sighted, and that's why I would ask everyone, please support the administration budget and oppose this. I just want to pick up a couple of other points, Mr. Mayor, that's been picked up by Councillor Sykes when he spoke and Councillor Thompson. So Councillor Sykes talks about the council tax support scheme, and he said, well, we changed it because there's an election this year. I can't remember, Councillor Sykes, in all the discussion you had with me about welfare reform and everything else, you ever mentioning anything about the council tax support scheme? Where was your appointment? Where was your proposal for the council tax scheme? I'll tell you what's happened. I'll tell you why we've been able to change it. It's because we worked very hard to make sure the collection rate is actually increased, and everyone who's responsible for paying it actually is paying it. And we put in a lot of effort. And as a result of that, we've been able to increase the collection, and that's why we're able to change this scheme. So that's the real reason. And for Councillor Thompson, She talks about, well, the proposal in here actually supports adult care and the budgets in adult care. But last council, she complained about us using reserves to actually meet the demand in adult care. So, you know, you've got to have a constant position on this. No, you've got to have a constant position. You either in favor of the proposal to increase the expenditure in adult care due to demand, or you're against it. You can't have flip-flop position from one meeting to the next meeting. Last meeting, you were complaining that we actually used the reserves to meet the demand, which was, by the way, we told people, we were very clear. It went to PVFM. You actually sat on it. I was there when the proposal went, and people voted on it, and they accepted it. When he came to the council, he criticized us. Now you're saying your proposals actually help to relieve the pressure on adult care. I just don't understand what your position is.
Councillor Jabbar, the time is up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I've finished anyway, thank you.
I think Councillor Jabbar realises that in order to get everybody into this debate, we can't keep extending, or else we'll be cutting people out and you'll whinge again. Councillor Blythe, followed by Councillor Batty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just on a point, the use of reserves was an overspending year or an underestimating year. It wasn't a higher demand on service, weren't particularly high demand. I spoke to the director, it was a financial, that he didn't know about it in fact. So let's get it straight before we start. That was an overspending year or an underestimating year. 2 million, big overspend or big underestimate of the service. And you had to borrow the money, to take the money out of reserves, and we agree with that because you can't let adult services down. That's one thing we don't do. And I will speak about the adult services and FVP 13103, and we want to put this 200,000 in because people will have start choices to make on this. I've said it in council before. When it comes to having to find extra money, and I know we've done lots of work, and I admire the administration and the officers for the work they've done with these people, because they have really cared for them, but we've got an estimate of between 5 and 50 people may have to leave that service for one, either unwilling to pay or unable to pay the extra cost. We're putting 200,000 in to give them some protection, some transitional protection. This isn't a one-off or anything. This is a one, but we need to move. People will move out, and we need to help those people. We need to help their families. We need to put some care in place. We need to put some safety nets in place for these people that may move out to these extra care homes. Because otherwise, if we don't do it, they'll slip through the net. And then it'll be, the family will be in turmoil, the people will be in turmoil. We need to put some money in to protect people that decide, for whatever reason, they're either unwilling or unable to pay those extra charges. So I cannot understand why you didn't accept this as a good move forward. This would help people, and make no bones about it. It's not through your administration. It's the lack of funding coming from central government that's done it. So let's, as a council, we found it, put it in, and protect those people through this transitional period. Because otherwise, we could have a bad news story, couldn't we, in the paper? And that would be shocking and terrible. If you look at the money that they have to find, if they're on a fixed income, it's a big lump. You know, I know people on fixed incomes, it's a big lump of money, and they may not be able to do it. It may be that the family are supporting these people just now with some extra finance, and they're hard stretched. So my play is, if you don't look at anything else in the budget, the alternative budget, if you don't look at anything, look at this. Because this, everybody knows somebody that's elderly that needs extra care. And then actually it might help to develop a service where we can re-enable people and keep them in their home. Because that's what the ultimate ambition of any adult services department is not to put people in long-term care, not to put them into residential care homes. Because actually if you put somebody in a residential care home, you're actually shortening their life. And the figures are there that prove that. and they shorten it by a long way. And the quality of life goes down. However good that residential care home is, their quality of life suffers tremendously from being in their own home. If they're in their own home, they have their independence. We've got technology that helps people to stay in their own home. And some of that money, if we don't use it all in the transitional, can be put into that, into keeping people in their own homes, supporting families to look after their older parents. It happens in other places in the world. It happens in other communities within this town. There's a lot of communities look after their older parents, tend to be us. But what you're spending now, it would be enough to drive you into distress. And I just urge you, nothing else, look at this again.
Move an extension.
And really think about what you're doing.
Do you really want to keep moving extensions? Because it means you probably won't get to speak, but I'm accepting if you want it. Right, Councillor Blight, you've got
I nearly don't. Just the most vulnerable people in our society, some of the most vulnerable people, think about what you're doing, think about how small a sum this is in the grand scheme of things, and really, you should be voting for this, if nothing else. And if you don't vote for it tonight, you should be going away as a leadership and thinking about it and saying, actually, this does make good sense. This is a small amount, makes good sense. If it were my grandma, I'd be doing it. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Can I just remind members, just in case they've forgotten, if you want to move an extension, it's got to be agreed by the council, right? So sitting and being quiet and leaving it to me doesn't work. And also, you don't have to use the 5 minutes. That's the maximum. If you've made your point, you don't have to get to the finishing line. I'm quite happy for you to finish halfway. Councillor Batty, and he'll be followed by Councillor Ruffley. Councillor Batty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Thompson said we ought to consult the people about reducing the number of councillors. Well, the last time we consulted the people, they reduced that group by 50%. And the next time we consult the people, and the time after that, we reduce them by another 50%. So by this time in May, you'll be down to single figures. You're very good at figures on elections, I'll give you that. You've already worked that out. So it's very easy to say reduce it by a third, because a third of 7 is not a lot. Now, he says on page 703.36 that as much reduced number of committees reduce the workload on councillors. Well, I didn't come on this council to go on committees. I came on this council to represent people who are disadvantaged. Very often we are the last port of call before they're in a real state of distress. Now, 3 of us were on the urban districts, Brian, Huey and myself. There were over 200 councillors then doing the work of 60. And I bet if you ask those same people to say reduce us to 20 or 40, they'll say, well, let's go back to the urban districts as well. Because it's very easy to vote for something that you don't need. Most people don't need councillors. Most people don't need intensive care. But when there's an epidemic of poverty, then we need people to represent them. You wouldn't reduce doctors and health service with an epidemic of flu, because those people are disadvantaged. I've been off this council for 10 years. My workload is twice as high as it was in the 1990s. I didn't deal with zero-rated contracts in the 1990s. I didn't deal with a number of potholes. I didn't deal with welfare rights. I didn't deal with much homelessness. But that's what's happening now. And councillors are emailing each other up till midnight with problems. And I'm getting answers from officers who are actually working now, who are working well into the evening to try and resolve those problems. Simply because we've got caseworkers helping, who do you think gives the work to the caseworkers? It's the councillors. The caseworkers don't go looking out for the issues. They rely on councillors to bring it to them. And you don't believe in it across Europe. We have the biggest number of population for number of councillors. We have about 2,500 population for each councillor. On the mainland of Europe, the next nearest is Denmark with 1,000. Across Europe, you're campaigning for localism. You don't actually believe in it. It just seems to be a money-saving exercise. And it's not even that. You're suggesting we can save 179,000 for next year. Well, Doncaster started this process 2 years ago. They may have reduced by 9. They've got elected mayor, by the way, so there isn't as much power and influence as the councillors. They might have that system in by next year. Now, if you want to save £100,000, you're free to give up your allowances. Now, it is a law of diminishing returns. I know that because there won't be many allowances to give up in 2 years' time, but that's what you've suggested. What we've got to do is not to get carried away with rhetoric of what the people vote for, because we bring back the stocks and we bring back hanging, but we're a civilised society, and we need people who work on behalf of the community to resolve those problems. What you're doing is copying what the Wirral did in their budget debate. The Liberals on Wirral last year in February, all 6 of them, by the way, moved that reduced the council by 1/3. So they'd lose 2. And that's what it's all about. You just copycatted it, but you don't believe in it. So stick to your principles that you believe in the rest of your colleagues about Europe, that you need elected representatives when people are at their wits' end and they don't know who else to turn to. We have got phone calls going on all the time and emails coming in for disadvantaged people. Thank God most of the people do not need that support. No wonder they say, let's get rid of them, because they don't know that we are the last port of call. And you actually think there's less potholes now than there was in the 1990s? Of course not. We've got to make sure that people are represented. Well, there's a democratic deficiency in this country. The most public expenditure is now spent outside the local authorities, in health authorities and DUP. We've got to monitor that. We've got to scrutinise that. The less there is of us, the more there will be those quangos who get away with maladministration. So believe in what you believe in, but don't suggest we can do it for next year, because it's practically impossible, because the Boundary Commission will not work that fast, and if we do it in Oldham, the rest of Agma will only have to row in with us. Go for reasonable cuts, but don't try and cut your own throats. Let the electorate do it for us.
Councillor Ruffley, followed by Councillor Kaiser Raymond.
Oh, it's on now. Hooray! Right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You'd think from some of the statements that have been made this last few minutes that the general election was next week. And in fact, it is posturing and on a grand scale, but we're really talking about our own budget and in difficult circumstances, and how possible savings could be made with a minimal reduction in the quality of service. I'm speaking very briefly on page 262, which refers to the street lighting, where it's actually proposing to save £200,000 on it. The street lighting PFI contract, as is well known by now, is running into considerable difficulties. And it is one of the more visible services that the borough provides, and that people see a new lamppost go up and they see the new style of lantern, sometimes in a rather inappropriate place. And when you get into the detail, you find that it's not been very well planned. There are hundreds of street lamps at the moment which are fastened to telegraph poles in the area where I live. Apparently the contractors haven't really thought how they're going to replace those. And I would suggest that the requirement for high-intensity lighting is no longer the case. I'm told that if you reduce the new lights by 50%, you do not get 50% saving on the electricity used. Councillor McCann's point about LED lighting stresses that this is a high, fast-moving technology in street lighting. It's almost a case for saying, proceed rather slowly. Within 2 years, you may find that the costs and the way you would think about it is completely different. I would suggest also not just actually cutting out some of these reducing the intensity of lighting. In parts of the borough, they could get rid of them altogether. In rural parts, it is no longer necessary to have high-intensity lighting in stretches of road where there are no houses. And there are numerous patches where I've seen, over the 50 years I've lived in the same house in the same part of Saddleworth, the amount of street lighting has gone up by leaps and bounds over the years. And with modern vehicle lighting, far more efficient than it used to be. As long as any pedestrians are taken care of on the pavements, and as long as crime is deterred in urban areas, because it's very necessary there, I would suggest that a rethink could be taken. This is an expensive project. It is not too late to have a reconsideration of the whole contract. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ruffler, for sticking to the time. Councillor Raymond, followed by Councillor Mr Bashforth.
Mr Mayor, when I read the preamble of the opposition administration amendment of the budget document, I was pleased to see that they've written it is in the spirit of positive contribution. But then, when I went on to read that they want a reduction of councillors, I found this very cynical. The reason I say that is because I personally work 9 till 5. 2 hours of my own work I spend on my council work. And some nights, most nights, I don't finish my council work till 10 at night. I represent a ward with complex issues, with varied issues, and it's very difficult to represent a community like that with so many issues, especially when there's language barriers, etc. So I think this is a cynical attempt in winning votes over, and I don't think it is in the spirit of positive contribution. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor, I think you should be the example set for the length of your speech, and I do thank you, and hope that the other people will take note. Councillor Mr Bashford, followed by Councillor John Dillon.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's not surprising I'm going to speak on the writing things, but I think just looking at what we've been listening to some of this thing, I don't think this is an alternative budget. I think this is just a series of stories that can go in the focus. I mean, there's all populist stuff that can't be delivered. It's things that cannot be delivered. You know they can't be delivered, but you can blame somebody else for the reason you can't. Now, I was going to talk about the statues, which all been spoke about, but you don't like them in town centre, but you certainly like them in the centre of Shore. I mean, I don't know what that's all about, Howard. Anyway, looking at the writing issues, I mean, John was almost apologetic that they brought this up, and it's been said it's a small scheme. Well, it isn't a small scheme. It's quite a big scheme for Royton. It's a big scheme for Royton. And we've just got rid of one of our major symbols of decay, which is knocking down the Assembly at long last, and we're ready to move on. Now, just look at Liberal Democrats' track record in Royton, and it's not very nice. If you just go back to 2000, it was a Royton South Liberal Democrat councillor who presided over the sale of the Assembly Hall. They got $225,000 for it and then quickly give it to Oldham Theatre Workshop. They didn't give it back to Royton. And then at the same time, we're playing with the idea of shutting the library. But public opinion and the 2003 elections soon put paid to that little scheme. We've talked tonight about extra care places and how important it is for people. But in 2004, another Royton South Liberal Democrat councillor was opposing the Tandleview Court building. He was actually against it and putting letters like this round saying how disgraceful it was. And now it's one of the most popular and an absolutely brilliant place for people to go. When they got back in control in 2008, you tried to stop us having our own Royton Community Forum. And then when the Leisure Centre, when it came out that it was due to be built in Royton, the Lib Dems did all they could to scupper that. And in fact, one of the signatories that of the calling to try and slow down was actually Diane, who at the time was a Royton South councillor. And in fact, Diane, you were campaigning against Royton when you were still a Royton South councillor and drawing your money for it. Yes, you were. Yes, you were. So it's no surprise now. It's no surprise now, Mr. Mayor.
The budget and not go on to
it's no surprise now, Mr. Mayor, that the Lib Dems want to scupper our developments in the town centre. Now, this is a complex issue, and nobody's saying there isn't problems, and there will be problems. I work in the contracting industry, I have all my life, and I tender for jobs that are going out, and there's always problems, and Royton's no different. But to put a stop on it now, to save a few £1,000s, would not only be stupid, it'd be irresponsible when we've got this far. Because if you do stop it now, the chances are you'll chase away the people who are working with. And they're not exactly banging on the door, are they, to come into our town. We need people who are willing to go the whole way, who are willing to stick their neck out, who are willing to look at things and take calculated risks to better our town. And that's what we are doing. Now, just another slight point there. Lynn was saying how disappointed she is that some of these projects are taking so long. And yet, the tone from the Liberal Democrats is that we should slow down. So what are we doing? Do we speed up or do we slow down? All this is fence sitting. And I suspect that the Royton issues here are designed purely and simply for the Sean Crompton focus magazines. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Well, Councillor John Dillon, and he'll be followed by Councillor Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Bashford said that not many people are banging on the door to develop Brighton. We agree with it. Well, he's just said it. That's the reason we're slowing things down. Can I just correct him with history, please, if you indulge me? Right in Assembly Hall. You could have stopped it when you came into administration in 2003. You could have it, but you didn't. No, hold on. The library was to be moved into Royton Assembly Hall.
Can we just listen to Councillor Dillon and not have a conversation and then comment afterwards? In fact, I'm insisting, Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That is a fact. That it could have been moved into Royton Assembly Hall, but a campaign by the Labour side went against it, and it is still in Royton Town Hall, for better or for worse. You represent Royton, okay, you live with it, but you would have still had Royton Assembly Hall. Well, anyway, if I can, I was looking at the budget book, page 132 actually says that this is a provision for a possibility of a contract being signed with a private developer. It may not even be used.
Councillor Dillon, can I just ask you a question? We are on the amendment now. Is this about the amendment, or the page you've quoted, is that about the original?
All I'm saying, Mr. Mayor...
Because we should be sticking to comments. I've asked for comments on the amendment, and we should be all indicating whether you're for the amendment or against it. And quite frankly, there's been one or two speakers, and I'll put it as nice as I can, it's left me bewildered as to whether they're for it or against it. So, Councillor Dillon, I'm relying on you to stick to the issue.
I am sticking to the issue. All I'm saying is this item on the administration's budget indicates the position vis-à-vis the money that we're proposing in our alternative budget, that it may not even be used. It actually says it on page 132. So all we're saying in this particular case is just slow it down. And as I've said earlier, Councillor Basher said people are not banging at the door. There's nobody's been signed up, as I understand it, for the food store. You certainly need an anchor tenant in Royton to get things moving in the private sector. You've got to get an anchor tenant to get the development going. It's the nature of the beast. I've been involved in it when I was at work. It's the way it works. And we have to be very careful also, and I hope negotiations do go very well, because the private sector will try and push as much of the risk onto the public sector. I've seen it many times. So all we're saying, we're not cancelling it, just slow it down. And at the end of the day, we say 2014-15, it doesn't seem to be moving. I'm sure that if we do get something settled on this, it's going to be way into the next financial year. So that is the reason why I'm suggesting that we just slow it down. That's all. And use the money elsewhere. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Dillon. And now it's Councillor Judge, followed by Councillor Harkness. Councillor Judge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A lot of what I've said, Councillor Bashforth has just alluded to, so I'm going to leave out the top bit. But I'll just answer Councillor Dillon on the sale of the Royton Assembly Hall, which was done by Liberal Democrats. They exchanged draft contracts, and the warning was that if we tried to change that, they would take us to court. That would have gone down well in Royton, wouldn't it? But they also, 12 months before, run down the hall, cancelled bookings and refused bookings. So then they came with, oh, no one's using it, and that was one of their excuses. They also ripped out all the lighting, the bar facilities, and lots of the other systems. And Councillor Bashforth is quite right, they spent the money for the hall before they even signed the contract, and that was spent in Oldham. So moving on to the situation as it is now, this is just like saying to developers, it's like you say to them, you do your bit, but we're not going to do ours. Which, like Councillor Bashforth said, they could just walk away. But the Royton Town Hall one, it's so short-sighted to delay that any further. We've got, it's Royton Town Hall, and that also serves parts of Crompton, Roy, and Shaw community. The service is under threat out there, run by other agencies that possibly could be housed in Royton Town Hall, and the police are going to be moving in, saving the time that they walk from Barn Street in the middle of Oldham down to Royton and Shaw to start their duty. So they'll be able to spend, they're going to be in Town Hall in the very near future. They'll be able to spend more time fighting crime in Royton, Shaw and Crompton. So absolutely short-sighted. But Mr. Ware, we see the real reason for what tonight's all about. The Lib Dems are already, the Liberal Democrats are already putting letters out in their areas claiming that all the money that we've got is being spent in Oldham, Failsworth and Royton. And that's what it's all about, trying to save their own necks by dividing the borough. And Mr. Mayor, you've been promoting the borough quite rightly. So dividing the borough and putting the regeneration and job opportunities for unemployed people at risk. But please vote against the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor. I just remind members, I'm calling you all out, but if your point has been made and you don't wish to speak, there'll be no penalties for you waiving it. Right, Councillor Harkness will be followed by Councillor Dearden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for clarity, I am standing in favour of this motion amendment. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the gullies, which I've obviously raised a few times here before. Councillor Hibbert's looking forward to that. And just on the point where Councillor Hull mentions that it's a luxury which we can't afford, well, in my part of the area, the world, there's plenty of examples where the current system hasn't been sufficient in Dobcross, Delft, Denshaw, Castleshaw. There was a recent accident on Holmfirth Road where the cause was water was a contributory factor. So I think it is important that we do invest in the gully cleaning. When we took over last time, we put another £500,000 into gully cleaning to bring it up to standard, and I think that this is now starting to be squandered. So we're down to one gully cleaning team for the whole borough, which isn't sufficient. So I think we do need to be investing in a regular maintenance, because it is false economies if we start going and firefighting later, because you know, as I've said, there's plenty of examples. You know, during last year where we did have some floodings in Dobcross, I was helping an old lady nearby whose house had flooded. Now, I'm not saying that that these that every flood in the area can be avoided, but certainly there was a lot of issues regarding where the gullies were, which weren't cleared, which could have alleviated some of those problems. I just want to get back on that to something that Councillor Akhtar said quite a while ago about Liberal Democrats and life chances. Yes, we do support life chances for people. That's why we've introduced a pupil premium. We've introduced free nursery places for everybody. That's why there's 1 million more jobs. 1 million more jobs all up full time, about 1.3 million more jobs. That's why the unemployment is down in Oldham. The unemployment for young people has dropped by 50%.
Carry on.
Youth unemployment is down. We've got more apprenticeships. We've got more people in work ever than before, and we've raised the tax threshold. And what really annoys me is the duplicity from Labour when they talk about protecting the most vulnerable, when they've already said they're going to cut welfare more than the Tories would do. And their MP, Rachel Reeves, has already said that she would stop housing benefits for the under-25s and job seekers allowance for the under-25s. On the bedroom tax, Labour introduced it in 2008. There is, I agree, the implementation of this has been quite shambolic, but they did introduce it in 2008 for people who are on housing benefit in the private sector. So some of the rhetoric that people in the local Labour Party have been putting around saying that people will move to the private sector and so on where bedroom tax doesn't exist, it does. Okay, and also on that, we've already put a motion at our conference, the Lib Dems, that a lot of this is going to be reviewed. But we also, locally, we put forward many points about mitigating those. And what's happened? We've heard very little from the Labour Party opposite. And also locally, the Labour Party introduced a charity tax. They also introduced the most draconian council tax scheme where everybody had to pay 25% of council tax regardless of their ability to pay. So that is Labour's plan to protect the most vulnerable people. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. The reason why I allowed this thing is because Councillor Harkness is not the only one to have strayed onto politics, I'm afraid. So let's be fair about it. Perhaps the rest of the speakers will contain themselves and show the people of Oldham that we're debating Oldham's budget. And this is about the amendment. Are you for it? Are you against it? And you give your reasons why. And then the public think, oh, you're quite sensible. But I don't feel they have that feeling at the moment. But anyway, I'll move on in hope and say that Councillor Dearden will be followed by Councillor Hindle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm speaking against the amendment on the grounds that I think it's naive and hypocritical. I'm looking at page 5, the Lib Dem ideals, which largely I would share, except in this context. Because what they talk about, eyes on the future, supporting individuals and communities, protecting the vulnerable, providing essential services, is exactly what this council and all of us councillors do. Then they follow that by saying they're going to back their ideals with efficiency and consistency and by introducing savings through recycling. Really, we're far beyond that point now, far beyond it. The cuts, Councillor McMahon said, there is no pleasure in introducing this budget, and that's absolutely true, and this is nothing to what the next 2 years is going to bring us. I feel sick at the prospect of it. So I think that's why it's naive. What are councils for? Councils are here to be responsible for the community, for residents, for businesses, for young and old, to bring people together. They're about planning for the future, about regeneration, about investment, and they're a safety net for the old and the vulnerable. And it's always councils that people look to when things go wrong, like floods, like the explosion in Shaw. We're the people people look to for help. I have a public health brief. What makes people ill? Poverty, loneliness, and the lifestyles associated with that makes people ill. What keeps people healthy? Jobs, homes, and friends. And that's what this council is trying to do, despite the cuts. We're doing this through Get Oldham Working, through investing in social housing, through building leisure facilities, through developing cooperative communities, through working with the GPs, putting money in to improve homes in our Warm Homes campaign. What is your government doing? It's destroying local councils. Some councils are risking bankruptcy. Is this government negligence? Is it carelessness? No, I don't think it is. I think it's a deliberate attack on local democracy, and particularly in the north, where we're Labour councils. Just one example, the cuts in Oldham, £250 per person. In Surrey, They've got an extra £25 per person. This is deliberate, orchestrated, damaging and devastating to the councils in the north. Shame on you for supporting this government. It's also about destroying the National Health Service. Your government spent billions on reorganising the National Health Service, none of it in the manifesto, opening it up to privatisation. We've got Arriva, we talked about them at the last council meeting, running ambulances. We've got Virgin, Richard Branson with his millionaire villas, his aeroplanes, his space explorations. Virgin runs sexual health services. Ironic.
Councillor Dearden, beans have made a plea, could you stick to the thing and not make a political statement? As good as it is, I think you should really stick to the brief.
Okay, I'll finish now. Shame on you for supporting a government that is hypocritical and supports profits rather than people. Thank you.
Right, we haven't time for any of that. Councillor Hindle, followed by Councillor Hibbert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just firstly, picking up on one of the comments that Councillor Dearden has just made about certain people being either better off or worse off. Let's just not forget, because of the Lib Dems in government, you, all of your colleagues, and everybody in this country who works will be £800 a year better off come April with the increase in the tax thresholds that this government has brought in.
Can we speak to this budget, please?
But, I mean, what I want to talk about more than anything, and it's a plea. It's a plea to the administration with all these grand plans and schemes that you've got. Let's just make sure that the job gets done, and the job gets done right, on cost and on time. We've had so many instances over the years where things have gone drastically wrong, and when we've needed to try and change things, it's been found that we can't. A couple of examples. Southlink, there was no break in the lease for that area. So when council departments wanted to move out, they moved out, but we're still paying rent now. And they've been out for years. Lease breaks, they weren't there. Dunwood Park, it was on the front of the Chronicle, so it must be true. £350,000 overspend on the parks redevelopment. We've got to make sure that that sort of thing doesn't happen again. You know, and some of that overspend was for additional work such as drainage and disabled access. Again, that should have been thought of right at the very start. Another one that was on the front page of the Chronicle, so again it must be true, the running costs for the Chadderton Wellbeing Centre, estimated at £100,000 for the year, actually cost over 800. So, you know, let's just make sure that those sort of things don't happen again. And finally, as Councillor Bashford has mentioned, Royton Assembly Hall, yes, recently demolished. Well overdue. But I do seem to remember another article in the Chronicle within days of you taking back control in 2011. Councillor Bashford said that will be down within the week. Damn long week. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Well, I think I've heard a lot of things that I'm doubtful about the truth this evening on all sides. So I think we'll move on, and you can have the argument after. And if you wish to speak again, put your hand up, and if you're lucky, we'll get there. But for now, will you please give silence for Councillor Hibbert?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to oppose this lightweight and populist amendment. Now, I didn't come in here with a prepared speech, but there have been one or two comments that have been made that have absolutely got to receive a response. Metrolink. Now, when
Councillor Sykes can stand up and say that he initiated Metrolink, that's a real beauty. That he's promoted it with our help. But I remember some years ago being on Transport for Greater Manchester when the then Liberal Democrat leader in this council voted against Metrolink coming to Oldham, and he voted in favour of it going to Hazel Grove. And why did he do that? I asked him, I said to him, Richard, why did you do that? You could have easily supported the amended motion. He says, I voted for it to go to Hazel Grove because I preferred to support my colleagues in Hazel Grove, not the people of Oldham. Now, I'm assuming he did that with the backing of his group. If he didn't, perhaps he was a rogue leader. I don't know. Maybe we'll get told about that. And the beauty about Metrolink, because there's been a comment on Twitter here tonight, it's not taking people away from the shops. What he's doing, because if people wanted to go away from Oldham to shop, they would have done in the past, on the train, or in the buses, or in the cars. What it's doing is giving people access to jobs right across the Greater Manchester conurbation. And they're coming back here, and they're spending their money in the shops, in the businesses, in the restaurants, in the pubs. I know that because I do it myself. Now, regarding the street lamps, Councillor McCann has already acknowledged that what he's asking for is actually already happening. It's happening. Councillor Ruffley gets up and makes his comments. He doesn't say that 2 or 3 weeks back I had a meeting with the officer with him and Councillor Harkness, and they agreed and were comfortable with the proposals we put forward. So there we go, you see. Now it's happening. It's a typical trick, this, of the Lib Dems. What do you know? They know that something's going to happen. So what do they do then? They call for it to happen. And then when it happens, they claim credit for it. It's a typical Lib Dem trick. Regarding the gullies, going back to the street lamps, we've already agreed, because I signed the paper last week, only last week I signed the paper, there's going to be varying levels of lighting at various times on various roads. And we're taking cognizance of all the comments that people are taking the trouble to come and make with me. And to be fair, Councillor Ruffley and Councillor Harkness asked for a meeting, and they had a meeting. Nobody else has asked for one over there. You stand up here and express concerns, but you don't come and see me. Don't come and see me. It's the same, and I'm digressing slightly, I apologise, about the Councillor Hindle going in the paper last week. He didn't come and see me. He didn't ask for anything from me, any information. If he'd asked for it, he'd have got it. Right, the gullies. It implies in here that they want to reinstate the provision to its level. It doesn't imply it, it says it. To its level under the Liberal Democrats. Now, I've made inquiries about this because I try to get information before I stand up to speak, and I'm reliably informed that there is no evidence that supports the claim that the gully cleaning has deteriorated over the years. Now, that's not to say that there aren't any gullies that need attention. I acknowledge that, there's bound to be. But all I can say to you is tell me. Tell me where they are. You tell me where the gullies need doing, and I'll make sure they get done. Now, there's been a change. All right, you do that, Alan, roughly. If you do it, there's no problem with that at all. There has been a change. There's been a reduction in the number of vehicles by 1. But there's been another significant change, and that is that the staff, the excellent staff that we have working for this council, have agreed to go on a 7-day week. So now gullies and various potholes, etc., can be dealt with Saturday, Sunday, and not just Monday to Friday. Now, if you don't think that's an improvement, if you don't acknowledge the effort that the people of the employees in the Highways Department, etc., are making, do that. Tell me that as well. And I'll tell you this, and I'll tell anybody in this council chamber, and anybody who's watching on the computer, wherever, I will defend the staff in the Highways Department, in the parks, in the litter, in the waste control, waste disposal. I will defend them to the hilt, because they are magnificent staff who are doing a magnificent job for the people of Oldham. You've got problems in anything, come and tell me. Tell me and I'll sort it out. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Ribbett, for 1 minute I thought you were taking my job there, but anyway, thank you very much for that contribution. Along with Councillor Hoole, you're very good and plain speaking, and your name will go forward as the town crier also, because I think you're Well, they're crying and you were doing the shouting. It's very good. It's working. It's working. Now, before I move on, I'm going to come back to Councillor Bashforth, because I think he was trying to make a point of personal interest about something which had been said, because he shouted it's not true. So, would you like to make the point, or was it? Are you looking at your colleague, or is?
I mean, to be quite honest, I'm not that bothered. But it's actually, I remember this, and it actually keeps coming back to bite me. But what I actually said, and it's here in the Cron, that we would, within 7 days, we would start to get things moving to get the all back into our possession again. And we did exactly that. We got Charlie Parker at the time to enter into talks with the owners and demand that we get everything rolling. So, you know, it's an easy mistake to make, Roger. But I did say words that way, but it isn't actually true. So, Mr. Mayor, it's here in the Cron, so it's there for everybody to see. So I didn't actually say what Roger said. I said something quite different that's been interpreted in totally the wrong way. Thank you.
Councillor Bashford, I was pleased to give you the chance to put the matter right, and I think we can now move on. Everybody knows we've been fair. And have you got a reply, Councillor Hindle?
Yep, Mr. Mayor, yes, I accept what Steve said. He's got the machinery that I was going off memory, and it was 3 years ago, but it was... I have apologised. You know,
I think we can take that, Councillor Hindle, as an apology, and I think Councillor Bashford has indicated he will accept such an apology. All right? So therefore now we move on, because there's a lot of people and we want to get everybody in, especially some of them are ladies, and we want to show our democracy in not missing out the ladies. So we'll have Councillor Bramridge followed by Councillor Sedgwick.
Well, thank you. I've not been called a lady, and I'm not sure that's really appropriate, but never mind. I
certainly think you are.
That's true. I shall say it in a ladylike way. Right, I'm rising to speak against the amendment, and in particular pages 709 and 717. So really I want to concentrate on extra care housing. Now I think there's some slight misunderstanding about what the proposals actually are. The point of extra care housing is a halfway house between sheltered housing and full residential care. And at the moment, we don't actually provide any of that in Oldham because we don't provide 24-hour support, which is really crucial to extra care housing. So the proposal is to introduce a concierge services into 4 schemes, and that will result in an additional charge. Now, the amendment proposes that the transition period before that charge is payable should be extended. It doesn't specify by how long. At PVFM, the proposal was for 3 months. That period is no longer included in the actual amendment, so it just proposes an unspecified transitional period. Now, the proposal already allows for a 4-year transitional period. The first year, there's no additional charge. The charges are then phased in over 3 years. The actual charges are less now than we originally proposed because we've been able to find money to reduce them. So in terms of the concierge charges, we think we've given more than an adequate period for the people who will need to pay. And I should stress that the majority of tenants will actually not have to pay because the majority are not self-funders. There will be some people who will have to pay, and there will be some of those people who would like to move out of accommodation. And in all honesty, if they don't require extra care accommodation, really they should be accommodated elsewhere to free that accommodation up for the more vulnerable people who do need it. And we've put in proposals to help those people. Anyone who does want to be relocated, there's proposals to help them with any welfare benefits they don't currently claim, to assist in the charges and to help them with rehousing. So we're confident that nobody will be put at risk by these. We've put adequate proposals in place. An additional transitional period is not required. In respect to vulnerable children, the way we're treating those is really to look at a total repackaging of how we provide care to vulnerable children. And that is an area of grave concern, and I rather resent the inference from the amendment that we would do something to put vulnerable children at risk when we have a very good record protecting children in this borough. And obviously the introduction of our new MASH is an element we've put in place to actually improve the protection that we already provide. We are confident that what we're doing does not put those people at risk. We are disgusted, to be honest, that we're having to do any of this. We don't like doing it, and I do appreciate the fact that the opposition has accepted that there really is very little room for manoeuvre and that we have to make these enormous cuts in social care because we are the biggest spender. Comes as no pleasure to me to have to do it. I'm appalled that we're having to do it. But I am confident that the way we're doing it, we are not putting those people at any more risk than the fact we have to make those cuts puts them in the first place. So I propose the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bremage. I've just, in the interest of fairness, I've tried to be even-handed, and I've only got 3 or 4 more people, so I'm going to call them, because I think then we can say we've had a fair debate. We've tried to be even-handed. It's Councillor Sedgwick, followed by Councillor Dean, Councillor Briggs and Councillor Alcock, in that order. And well, if you did, Derek, I'll put you on the end there, and then that'll have to be it. Because, to be honest, you can't say we haven't. We've taken over a third of the council. We've taken more than a third of the council. So the next one is Councillor Sedgwick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to speak on 2 subjects tonight. I'll be brief. The proposal by Liberal Democrats to save money by ceasing publication of Borough Life, and our plan to instead use this money to help clean up our streets. Budgets are all about living within your means, whether that is a budget of the size of the council's or our own household budget. The same principle applies. You cut your cloth according to your needs, and unnecessary luxuries have to go. The Borough Life is, yes, an unnecessary luxury here. We can save over £50,000 a year by cutting it, and this course of action is painless. It's not as though the Borough Life actually seeks opinions from the people of our borough. It tells them how good the council is. Not always a view shared by many of our citizens. Ask the people of our borough, do you want propaganda paper from the council or do you want a cleaner borough? And I know exactly what they will say. They would much rather we spend their money on creating a cleaner borough. So I make no apologies to anyone for supporting this proposal, to instead invest the money in keeping the borough clean. This will be money well spent. It will be an investment much valued by the hard-pressed council taxpayers of our borough. And maybe, just maybe, might encourage people to do a little bit more for the borough, helping to keep our Oldham clean, which is what you say you want, Councillor McMahon. And by the way, the Conservatives have put a leaflet out supporting this. Thank you very much.
Well, don't look at me. I'm not a part of them. I'm independent. Councillor Dean.
Thank you,
Which is correct as the Mayor, and you should all know that. Councillor Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just think that this amendment is so backward-looking, and we want to look forward in this town. And what really concerns and annoys me is the rhetoric around these amendments as well. Such things as, you know, it says our residents are in, you know, we're fighting that our residents shouldn't be enslaved by poverty. There's rhetoric all through this amendment like that. Now, who's caused the poverty, Mr. Mayor? £90 million a year is being taken out of the welfare budgets in this town. Nearly 200 million from this council. And what's that creating? It's creating a lot of rhetoric from people like Councillor Harkness, who claims all these jobs. He doesn't tell you that there's actually 1 million people that aren't in full employment from 2009. Yes, there's part-time jobs. There's people really struggling. And that's why we really don't need to reduce the number of councillors. Like Councillor Batty and people that have been here a long time, the workload has gone through the roof of councillors. There's people that are sanctioned on a regular basis. In actual fact, the figures are true. It's actually topped $1 million a year now. People that are being sanctioned, that means they're being deprived of all money, all benefits. There's families that are really on the breadline, that they have to regularly use food banks, you know, and that's a tragedy. Now, the people opposite, their MPs have gone through the lobbies, voting for these things, time after time, over the last few years. Now, they've done that against a background, they tell us, of a poor economy. Yet, of course, when you actually look at the figures, they're actually spending more in the public sector in this area than they did previously. A lot more. And what are they spending on, as Councillor McMahon illustrated? We're spending it on acute services. We're spending it on benefits to keep people unemployed, or else various things like tax credits, because people are only in part-time work and can't manage. And the whole system is wrong. And I know to some degree that's stretching the point of the amendment, but the reason I mention it is that that rhetoric is within this amendment. So what I suggest is that this amendment really is just about a few headlines. They've accepted 99.7% of the budget. It's such a minute part of the budget we're talking about. Most of it extremely backward-looking. Things like reducing the number of councillors as well isn't even within the gift of this council. We can refer it to the Boundary Commission, who might even increase the number of councillors. Or else they might disproportionately look at the areas that have got deprivation and give more councillors to them and possibly reduce them down to one in Saddleworth per ward. You know, they could well do things like that, because they actually have done that in Stoke. You know, when it was reviewed in Stoke, they actually did that. You know, so let's not run away with the idea that we can actually control. Well, it might not frighten you, Mr. Mayor. It doesn't frighten me particularly, but it just worries me that we're giving over something that's not in our gift to somebody else to decide what's going to happen in this town. And that's what this resolution does. So let's look forward, not backwards, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. I think we've time to get in. Councillor Briggs and Councillor Alcott. Councillor Briggs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I rise to oppose the amendment. And as my colleague Councillor Dean says, it's the rhetoric that's in this amendment that I won't respond to. In the amendment, they say that they are determined to act as a responsible opposition to the current Labour administration. Fine words, but with little substance, I feel. If they were a credible opposition, like they say they are, why aren't they asking their Tory government, coalition government, why they've imposed £250 per head cuts, as Councillor Dearden says, when the average cuts to Lim-Deb authorities are only £38 a head, and to Tory-run authorities £36 a head. If they were a credible opposition, Mr. Mayor, they would be asking the government why they've imposed these cuts of £250, when in Oldham we've got the 25th highest percentage of benefit claimants of all the councils in England. I think there are about 340 odd councils in England. When we have the 46th most deprived area in England, and when we have the 36th highest rate of child poverty. Mr. Mayor, their government is attacking the most deprived people in Oldham so that they can alleviate the impact of the cuts in the Leafy Lane, Lib Dem and Tory-run councils down south. They should hang their heads in shame, and as far as being a responsible opposition, we'll leave it up to the good people of Oldham to decide at the next local elections. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Alcott. Just a point of order. I want to tell you that out of the speakers, 55% have been from one party and 45% from another. So nobody can complain, as they did do last time, that I haven't called the required number of people. Councillor Alcott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Briggs. Mr. Mayor, talking about council tax freeze this year. Why not last year, Councillor McMahon? Perhaps because there was no election. You talk of a cooperative council and listening to our residents. The residents of Shore and users of our baths don't think so. Thousands petitioned to save the baths, and yet you did not listen, and you are closing our pool in Shore. Councillor Hoole and Councillor Hibbert, please ask any residents after they have been flooded, is it a good idea to be reactive or proactive with gully cleaning? I'm sure they would say proactive. That's before they are flooded. Councillor McMahon, Councillor Dearden, Councillor Dean and Councillor Briggs said about the cuts from central government, and yet they all forgot to say that a future Labour government have said they will not reverse any cuts. That's not reverse any cuts. Mr Mayor, our plan to reduce councillors from 60 to 40 are a direct response to suggestions by staff and members of the public. Citizens were crystal clear in telling us that in order to protect frontline services, that no aspect of council business should be exempt from possible savings. That includes looking at the amount of money spent on councillors. And we Liberal Democrats have heard and are listening. Councillor Batty, just in case you forgot, in 2011, a report came to council to cut the number of councillors from 60 to 40, and both Labour and Conservatives voted against it, just in case you forgot. This council presently has 60 councillors, 3 per ward. Our proposal is to reduce this number to 40 councillors with 2 per ward with the 2-year elections. This would save some £179,000 per year, just on basic allowances alone. This could and should be used to protect frontline services. Councillor McMahon keeps saying this cooperative council listens. Well, please listen to our residents and support the amendment. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Just tell me, Councillor Effernan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Surprised I wasn't seen, I'm big enough. Mr Mayor, I rise to support the proposed amendments, and particularly proposal OPB 1002 to invest £95,000 in the street cleaning service through greater provision of neighbourhood enforcement. I'm absolutely fed up with people telling me that the town is getting, the borough, but the town itself is getting dirtier. I don't want to talk this town down. I am quite the opposite. I talk it up. The proposed investment in enforcement reflects public demand. The responsible citizens of our borough are fed up with suffering the effects of the dirty, lazy brigade. But getting it right and up to standard, the standard we demand, costs money. Playing catch-up is more expensive. I was delighted yesterday to see a team of litter pickers on the Oldham bypass clearing the debris thrown away by drivers and passengers who consider the central reservation to be a giant dustbin. We should not need to do that, but we have to until we all have pride in our borough and are used to seeing the place permanently clean. It is a necessity. And how much did that clean-up cost yesterday? Just the one. There's no doubt our streets have got dirtier in recent years. My constituents tell me so. And I'm sure that other councillors of all parties have the same complaints. A few reports of fines being imposed for littering could have a salutary effect. Obviously, every case will be reported as being only one bus ticket or one cigarette stub that blew away in the wind. But the £80 fine could remind people that they should clear up their own rubbish. The council is not responsible. Some years ago, when I was being harangued that the council were not doing everything that it could to make the town centre and borough cleaner, I pointed out I'd never seen a councillor dropping litter. And that's 19 years on this council, and I still haven't seen a councillor dropping litter. In 2010, I'll speak to you later, Councillor Batty. In 2010, the Tidy Britain campaign declared Oldham to be the cleanest borough in Greater Manchester. We couldn't claim that today. We won the Britain in Bloom competition, beating Chester, a city renowned for its beauty and tourist appeal, and Oldham was better. And how strange, I can clearly remember Councillor Hibbert railing against spending money on flowers some years ago. But now telling the world how wonderful we are, consistently being commended for our efforts. Remember that it was the Liberal Democrat administration which restarted those efforts to make our borough more attractive. All of these things are important, but one comes above all other: fly tipping. Every time I read of a prosecution for fly tipping, I cheer and commend the officers who have found the evidence and the cabinet member for bringing that prosecution. I give credit where it's due, Councillor Stretton. I wish that the courts would come down more heavily on the perpetrators. By employing more enforcers will no doubt have a positive effect. The culprits now feel they won't get caught and weep buckets when the fine's imposed. We've already read the stories. They paid someone to dispose of the rubbish legally, but it's always the man with no name, the man in the pub. It is their fault. Never mind, it's not my fault, Gub. More enforcement and prosecutions and fines will have an effect on this borough and this town centre. The £95,000 could well save our borough much more that in staff wages clearing the stuff up, and the feeling of pride in our borough will grow. I understand we're no longer baiting the sewers for rats. We've got one here, not mine. It's reported that you're never more than 10 feet from a rat.
We're a lot closer.
I know, I've noticed. I'm a lot closer to a few others as well, Rob. With the recent very wet weather, there are reports of an upsurge in the rat population. I would prefer our rats stay at least 10 feet away.
Could you are on the red.
Thank you. Please support the amendment in full, especially this particular part of it, and help bring the well-deserved pride back to Oldham. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I am now moving to ask Councillor McMahon if he wishes to reply, followed by Councillor McCann. They have 10 minutes each, because I honestly do feel, as the Mayor, I've given a fair hearing to everyone. And if you haven't been listened to, it's your own fault for not indicating earlier. Councillor McMahon.
Sorry.
Keep up, Derek. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, there's a lot to come back on there, isn't there? Can I just make one point of clarification on Councillor Hartness? I mean, I do at times find your naivety quite cute, but tonight I find it quite irritating, if I'm honest. The reference back to 2008 and Labour introducing the bedroom tax for private rented properties is, of course, completely untrue. It was actually introduced, I've got a note here, the Rent Officers Additional Functions Order, 1989, under a Tory government introduced that. If you're going to do that, you should at least check your facts. Google's a wonderful thing. Now listen, we can all posture, and we're all politicians, so we've all been to the school of posturing, but actually tonight's a serious night. It's about trying to get a balanced budget and putting this town on an even keel to face the challenges that the people of Oldham are facing. And when it came to rise up to that challenge, you just didn't meet the mark, I'm afraid. You just didn't meet the mark. John, your comment, and you know, you're a good guy, John, but you've really not stepped up on this. The comment that it was very difficult to go more than £600,000 because of the challenging times that we're in. Well, guess what? We've got to find £600 million next. If you can't find more than £600,000 today, how on earth could the people of Oldham have any confidence in you as an administration in finding the next £60 million that your government have introduced? I want to cover a few options that have been raised. Borough Life magazine, very popular to say council propaganda paper. Actually, it isn't. This is a community paper for the community that represents what's going on in the community. The reason why people in Oldham are more satisfied with the council is because we're telling them what the council's doing. They haven't got to rely on the focus and the negativity of Liberal Democrat propaganda, because we're giving them the facts. And if you don't like the content, why don't we say it to Andrew, the Get Oldham Working Apprentice who's featured in here? Somebody that's been supported into employment because of this council. Why don't we say it to Steve and to Chris, our hard-working pothole staff, who are out repairing the roads in Oldham, who are featured in the latest edition? Why don't we say it to Alison, who features with her son Isaac, a 12-year-old asthma sufferer, who's benefited from our warm home scheme thanks to the work that Council Hibbert's been doing. A brand new boiler, meaning she's not living in a cold home anymore. Say to her that this paper that celebrates and shares that and tries to get more people to benefit, tell her that this paper isn't worthwhile. And at the same hand, why don't you tell Kay and Billy? Two hard-working foster carers in Oldham who are featured in this, who are really banging the drum, trying to get other people to foster care and help another little life in Oldham be better than it is. Tell them that this newspaper isn't value for money. I tell you what, it wasn't value for money when you were in control because you didn't have the news to share. 3 wasted years of a Liberal Democrat administration in this council. You're in a very odd position on regeneration, aren't you? You know the public of Oldham support it. So you can't come out and say you're against it. But equally, there's a bitterness there, a bitterness of 3 wasted years when you had an opportunity and you just didn't grab it. 2011, when we came in to control this council, the cupboards were bare, Councillor Thompson. There was no money put aside for regeneration. There was no money put aside to prepare for Metrolink. There wasn't even a single penny to pay for Metrolink coming through the town centre. It would have been a car through down Union Street at the tram tracks, and everything on either side of it would have been left derelict had you been in control of this council. Even the work on King Street stop, the stop that people see today, wouldn't exist had we have not put the money aside to pay for it. So it's all right to sit on the fence, and are we for it, are we against it? Well, we better not do that, let's just urge a bit of caution. You can't afford caution when it comes to ambition. That doesn't mean that you're reckless with money. It doesn't mean that you don't have the proper staff in place to project manage. But delay after delay after delay, and Councillor Hoole, fantastic contribution today, put it absolutely right. You think delaying is going to step up to the mark for the people of Oldham? What you're trying to do, and what's been so evident in this budget, is you're on your way out. The reason why you can afford to reduce the number of councillors is because it won't affect all you lot, because you're going to be out on your ear. Even John's looking at taking some seats in Saddleworth. And what you're trying to do, as our non-political mayor, of course, and what you're trying to do, after all that, is to appeal to public cynicism. Let me tell you this, the public of Oldham aren't cynical because of this chamber. They're cynical because of Westminster politicians abusing their expenses. We shouldn't be getting into all that. The reason why Eric Pickles has been able to attack councillors' pensions is because of the public cynicism created by Westminster politicians. We should be defending councillors. We're part of the community. The reason why I put my name on a ballot paper is because I want to fight for the people in my area and represent their interests, not for the allowances. Do you think a cabinet member giving up full-time employment to do what is now a full-time job, do that for £12,500 a year? For the hours that they work, do you think I have given up my daytime job to do this 60, 70, 80 hours a week? You do it because we love the town, because we want to represent, and because when we see people who are disadvantaged, there's something inside us that makes us want to stick up for them. But you don't get that, do you? It might be all right in Saddleworth. I tell you what, in Failsworth, people are struggling. People are struggling to pay the mortgage, the rent. People who go to Aldi are finding pennies in the purse to pay for a loaf of bread. I don't know if you've come across that before, when you take somebody to one side in the checkout and give them some money to pay for a loaf of bread. And what's your alternative? Queue up at the food bank, big society. The role of councillors isn't and shouldn't be for buying and selling. If you believe in democracy and you believe in fair representation, then you should believe in the power of this council chamber. I've toyed with the idea of reducing the number of councillors. In some dark days, I could say maybe just needs one, if Brother and I met. And every one of these councillors here could make a case for the same. Providing you're the one that's left, You can always make a case. But I tell you what, the town would tip over. The council would tip over. Once you fail to recognise the importance of councillors, actually you fail to recognise the importance of democracy. And why, you know, I understand that. You've got into government by lying your way into government, by making promises you knew you couldn't keep. You're disillusioned, and I can see that. And you know, Councillor Briggs' comment about your next party conference being a telephone box probably isn't too far from the truth. I know it can be difficult to find 20 candidates, particularly if they're wearing a yellow rosette, but just try a bit harder, eh? Don't undermine democracy for the sake of internal party disputes that you have, and because your members are leaving at a rate of knots. I think that just does a real disservice. I really resent the way some of this goes down into the gutter. I really resent how statues and public art have been portrayed as being something negative. Now, don't get me wrong, there's been some fine examples of public art in Oldham that's been terrible. We've had water features with no water in, and we've had clocks that don't tell the time. But that isn't what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something that is unique in Oldham that we can be proud of. Not an arty-farty thing that people don't appreciate. Something that gives a place and heart to Oldham Town Centre, which it needs. Now, the budget line that was in the budget wasn't taking out debt for that. It was a heritage lottery application. That was the intention that would make the case of regenerating Oldham, and the icing on the cake would be something that people would look at that would be beautiful and give them confidence and pride of being an Oldhamer. Now, whether we get that money, whether we don't, we should at least try, shouldn't we? And let's not fall out over that. Let's just try, because it's better coming to Oldham than it is going to Camden or Islington or somewhere else. So let's get behind it and try and get the money into Oldham. That's what we're all about, surely. You know, there's something quite telling in all of this, really, which is you haven't quite moved on. When you were in administration, you talked really the same talk, but you didn't have the vision. So it's very easy to lock yourself away in this building and just kind of convince yourself with the council officers that it's just about X, Y, and Z. But what you miss, and the reason why resident satisfaction was so low, was the need really to step up and stick up for people in Oldham. But I should say, this divide that you're trying to get between Royton and Shaw will not work. We're a council for the borough. We're not a council for one ward over another. We're a council for everybody. Royton's important because it was left, when you had time to do something about it, Royton Assembly Hall was not even on your list. Hollingwood, regeneration. When you had the time to do something about that, you cancelled the CPO that would have seen that area prepared for redevelopment. You cancelled it because you didn't have the vision. When you had the opportunity to find the money for Oldham Town Centre, you couldn't even get your house in order to find the money because you didn't have the vision. And yet in your own amendment, you try and claim credit for it. You claim credit for starting work on the Old Town Hall. Mark my words, the only thing you did to the Old Town Hall was make it drier for the rats and pigeons who occupied it. What we've done is to give it a lease of new life. A cinema that hundreds of thousands of people will enjoy. A building that's been closed for 26 years. Man, woman and child of Oldham will be going in and seeing it now. We should all be behind that.
Councillor McMahon. Yeah. Everybody agreed? Extend.
Now, Shaw does need work, and Lees needs work as well. Let me tell you this, though. There is no such thing as a Liberal Democrat area anymore. If you think you're safe in Shaw, or Crompton, or Lees, we're coming after you. Because people there are fed up of their areas being prostituted for a cheap political point. We have put money aside for Royton. We have put money aside for Oldham Town Centre. And today, I'm very pleased to announce £100,000 for Shaw High Street. £100,000 for Lees High Street. We are a council for everybody. And you will not divide this town with your petty politics.
Councillor McCann with his right to reply. 10 minutes.
I've been writing a little bit, and I have a bit of paper here that reminds me why I sort of stayed in politics in Oldham. And a lot of people have gone back on history and gone on to national stuff, and it's actually an Oldham budget. We're suffering from national position, we're suffering from the actions of national government. But actually, this to me was one of the drivers. And it says here, and it was from the Cron, the gap between the health of the rich and the poor is greater now than at any time since records began, research showed. Government initiatives over the last few decades have done little or nothing to close the gap between the life expectancy of poor people compared with those who are wealthy. And it goes on and it says a lot more things. But to me, it points, and I'll agree with a lot of people on this, of all political parties, to the imbalance between the wealthy south and London and the north that is still suffering. And actually, parts of Saddleworth, Jean, do suffer because some of those people are on small pensions from the mills and then rely on OAP. So Saddleworth's not all wealthy. There are people up there with surprisingly high levels of health and heat, energy costs. There is. Can't argue with that, but there is. But that is one thing that kept me in politics, and actually it shows to me the need for local councils to try and work together. Because my God, if we split up, they really are going to stuff us. Apologies, Mr. Mayor. And then, Councillor Hoole, value for money, you mentioned with the auditors, all was okay, they said. I've got a horrible, horrible feeling that that is not the same set of auditors that said that about the banks, was it? Because that was one of the biggest problems in life. The banks were allowed to do what they wanted for profit. The government lost control. And there's a comment here about this council from the auditors. The council currently has a relatively high financial indicator for long-term borrowing against fixed assets and council tax revenue when compared to other similar councils. So what I'm saying about the capital, Jim, is I think the regeneration ideas are ambitious, they're great, but my God, we've got to get them right. You cannot afford a Dunwood Park scale disaster of 20 to 25% on something like the town hall or the leisure centre. And that is what a large part of my budget thought on the capital area and the revenue consequences of a loan is. My God, we've got to make sure that those contracts are watertight, that the risk does not go back to the council, that it stays with the contractor. And Housing 21 was a classic example, because when we were in control, we deducted money from them for poor work, for not doing it according to contract. When we lost control, the administration, the Councillor Hibbert, carried on with those deductions, and it's meant the council has not had to pick costs up of £20 million plus. It's vital that these schemes are run right, and if it means that there's a 2, 3, 4, a bit of slippage, Councillor Jabbar, I'll back you on it, because we've got to get these right. The amounts of money are so big, we cannot afford to get them wrong. What we have picked with Royton was an area that was a fairly small amount of money, £3.5 million, Steve. I support the regeneration of Oldham. I support the regeneration of Royton. I think it's good. But what we've got to realise, actually, is that there are inbuilt delays in Royton, from what I've gathered. There are problems with getting the commercial agreements, and there are problems with actually deciding what to put into the town hall. And until those businesses are built and trading, you don't get business rates. Until people are in work, they don't have a job. So the schemes are great, but we've got to make sure that the foundations are right. If the foundations are not right, we end up with mortgaging the future, and we then end up with someone who's got negative equity. And so Jim says we've got to be positive. I wish in some ways I hadn't seen some of the things that have gone wrong before, because that does make me rather cautious and want to say, are we sure? Have we checked? Has this contract been read not once or twice, but have we had it gone over by experts? Have we got project managers who can do it? Have we got a management team in here that is strong enough after all the cuts and problems to actually handle several big schemes at once? That is vital. We've got to have control in the council. There are one or two other sort of minor comments there that really I can only describe them as very highly rated finance team and director here does say that our proposals are legal, responsible, possible. So that, I think, is a relevant comment. The other points are, Councillor Batty, I take your point about the number of councillors, but I do think, and other people actually, Councillor Raymond, thank you for a very brief comment. I do think it's time that this council actually looked at the number of councillors, looked at what we do, looked at what we have to support us, look at the increasing problems, and then if need be, say to the people of Oldham, actually, this councillor group is one of your last protections against things being imposed from Westminster. But we need to tell the people what we do. We need to tell the people how many hours people here spend working. We need to tell people how many councillors and ex-councillors have recently died, some of them well before the time, in my opinion. This is not an easy job. People complain and wonder why we haven't done something about it. And it's always the mysterious they or council that should do something about it. Well, let's tell people what we do. Let's have a look at it, and let's say we've reviewed it, and my God, these people work many, many hours. So we're not reducing the number of councillors. But I think it is the right time to have a look. This is going to be a horrible next 2 years. Won't take an undue amount of effort, I think, to cover that. Steve, I'll take what you say about Royton, and I think I've covered that. Please listen, we are not against Royton being developed, the work in Royton, and the money being spent in Royton, but we do say that there is inbuilt delay in the Royton scheme, and there is money there to take advantage and recycle before next year, where I think it will be available. Councillor Dearden, I think you're a dear lady, along with Councillor Brownbridge there. But actually, we're not go wrong, and my God, I don't want to see him go wrong again. Sorry, Jim, but you'll go grey as well one day. Oh, right. But I do think it's important. You mentioned something like warm homes. That was started in my time, I remember it. And I remember the NHS refusing to put any money in to support that officer until suddenly they realised 12 months later, hey, she's pulling in a pile of money. Oh, we'll join it now. Actually getting places like the NHS to join in innovation and something that's new and a bit risky, oh, that really is hard work. Councillor Hibbert, Councillor Sykes informs me that he secured the money to bring Metrolink to Oldham. And actually, having heard a lot of other people as well, I think Councillor McMahon has also said that together they've had to fight a lot of people and a lot of interest to get that Metrolink into Oldham on time and to standard. So I think actually that has been an example of cross-party working and consistency. Councillor Brownridge, thank you for the extra care housing. The comments were informative, shall I say that? But I will say that with the adult services, I would have thought any extra money would have been welcome, to be honest. And I do think that it's time that we stop this ankle kicking at budget time. If we have to find another £60 million out of Oldham's budgets, I do think it's about time that people started thinking and taking ideas from each other and saying, at least we'll look at it, even if the answer is no, it doesn't work, or no, it doesn't make sense. We have tried to be constructive, and we have tried within what I can only describe as limited finances to give you some suggestions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I would just point out that hopefully tonight we have had a constructive debate, we have had rights of reply, and hopefully people will be voting in the best interests of the Metropolitan Borough of Oldham, and I'm sure that's what they've always done. And I just think that whatever we vote for, I can honestly say that people of all parties, I haven't really come across anyone who hasn't come here and realised that it's jolly hard work. And I looked up, especially in case I was asked, and I was asked at lunchtime at a forum I went to, what I thought about the salaries of Oldham Council. And I pointed out to them that luckily I'd taken the time and trouble to look it up and found And I don't want to start a mutiny, Jim, with the members, but I found we're one of the lowest paid for the responsibility we have and the number of people in the Metropolitan Borough. So if anybody out there's watching and listening, I can tell you now that irrespective of politics, I've always found people on Oldham Council to be jolly hard-working people. And if they're in it for the money, they're coming to the wrong place. And now we're moving to a recorded vote. But before I do, Councillor McMahon has a personal explanation with a point raised that he'd like to make.
Mr Mayor, it's in relation to the point made around the negative balance sheet. To be very clear, the reason why there is a negative balance sheet is because the last major decision from the opposition was to transfer the housing stock. And that's the reason why our assets have gone down.
Having said that now, we're going to take a recorded vote, so I'll leave it to the officers to do that. Yes. Pardon? Would you speak through the microphone? Because up here, I'm a bit mutton deaf, I can't see.
Well, I'd like to put a point of personal explanation as well. And
We've already moved on to the vote, I'm afraid, the recorded vote. I did announce it, and I did give loads of time. So we'll start with the recorded vote.
Yeah, recorded vote on the amendment. Okay, so Councillor Akhtar. Councillor Alcock. Councillor Alexander. Not present, sorry. Councillor Ames. Councillor Azad.
Would you speak through the microphone loud and clear so the Chief Exec knows?
Councillor Ball. Councillor Bashforth Marie. Councillor Bashforth Steve. Councillor Batty. Councillor Bealey. Not present. Councillor Blythe. Councillor Briggs. Councillor Brownridge. Councillor Chatterton Amanda. Councillor Chatterton Olwyn. Against, okay. Councillor Schwan. Councillor Dawson. Councillor Dean. Councillor Dearden. Councillor Dillon John. Councillor Dillon Philomena. Councillor Fielding. Councillor Gary. Councillor Hack. Councillor Harkness. Councillor Harrison. Councillor Heffernan. Councillor Hibbert. Councillor Hindle. Councillor Hoole. Councillor, whose name is absent. Councillor Iqbal. Councillor Jabbar. Councillor Judge. Councillor Malik. Councillor McCann. Councillor MacDonald. Councillor McLaren. Councillor McMahon. Councillor Moores. Councillor Price. Councillor Quimere. Councillor Mann. Councillor Ruffley. Councillor Salamat. Councillor Sedgwick. Councillor Shah. Councillor Sheldon. Councillor Shuttleworth. Councillor Stretton. Councillor Sykes. Councillor Thompson. Councillor Tour. Councillor Uriman. Councillor Williams. Councillor Williamson. Councillor Wrigglesworth. And Councillor Hudson. Abstain.
I have to announce that the amendment is lost, having been defeated 41 against, 13 for, with the Mayor's abstention. Therefore, we're back to the original motion. We'll now debate the original motion, which is now the substantive motion. Does any member wish to speak? Yes, I've got a Councillor Alcock, yeah. Yes, yeah. Yeah. Right. That's all. Have you seen anybody over there? No. First of all, Mr McMahon has the right to reply after the debate has taken place, and we've only got 2 people, so I'll take them in order they indicated. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I give my strong support to the administration budget because I'm not going into the fine details of numbers and finance and so forth, because that's been done well tonight. But I want to look at the spirit of this budget, of the administration budget, because it's a spirit of fighting back against the savage cuts inflicted on us by what at times seems a merciless coalition government. It's not only robust, but it sends out a strong message that this Labour administration is not prepared to just batten down the hatches in the unlikely hope of weathering a storm, another euphemism for managing decline. No, this administration is going to be bold, innovative and creative, but not in a reckless, devil-may-care way, but with forethought and in a well-planned, costed and responsive way. The challenges caused by the cuts are immense, and ahead they're increasing. We can't move on without making painful decisions, and too often we're forced into that position of choosing the least bad option, something none of us came into politics to do. Budget meetings used to be about choosing the best option. Too often we're having to choose the least bad. But this budget says there is a will to find new ways of working within the council with partners to the benefit of the people of Oldham. This budget demonstrates that we want to build pride and prosperity back into our borough through making it a better, more attractive place to live, with excellent housing, shopping, leisure provision, where our children are well educated, our older people are well cared for and provided for, and where increasing number of our residents are able to find proper employment, thus improving the economy of the borough, which is for the good of all. The opposition alternative says a lot about our administration budget. It's a slim document that suggests they know that we are getting things right on the whole. They know that we're there to meet the need to fight against the government's disgraceful treatment of local government. This is a budget that says we believe in Oldham and its people, and we trust the people of Oldham. We want them to trust us. It's also, this budget of ours...
Councillor Alcock.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In relation to the redevelopment of Royton, we are not looking to delay the development. It has inherent delays built in.
We have to be speaking for the motion now. It's been lost, the amendment, so you need to speak about the motion.
Okay. I'll talk about what Councillor Harrison's just talked about. As I have said already, on the cuts from central government, any future Labour government will not reverse any cuts. Mr Mayor, Councillor McMahon says it all when he says about spending £100,000 in Shaw High Street. And, no, that's later. We'll talk about that later. In Shaw High Street. Firstly, could we have it spent in Market Street? That's where our shops and our village centre is. And we welcome the £100,000 into Lees. £100,000 in each centre. This is against £3.5 million in Royton. It is Labour who are creating divisions. We will let the residents decide. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I think where the mix-up became, that it was High Street in Leeds that I think Councillor McMahon said. So let's not get confused. One is Market Street, one is High Street, but I think most people around this chamber should know, and if they don't, they shouldn't be here. Right, here we go now, back to a recorded vote after Councillor McMahon has given his right of reply. I almost thought he looked happy enough not to give it.
Thank you. You're becoming one of those talent show hosts, Mr. Mayor, where you take us to the edge and then pull us back. I should, just for absolute clarity, what the actual name of Shaw High Street is neither here nor there. People accept the High Street for the town centre, and I think you're just being semantics. I should say that I'm slightly nervous now about whether I can trust the Shaw and Crompton District Partnership to actually spend this money. They don't seem to have a clue about what their vision for Shaw may be, and I'm not sure if I might have to send Schwab in to handhold. Sorry, Schwab. Or maybe after May, our Labour members on that district will be able to help. My only contribution, Mr. Mayor, is really just to thank the staff who work for Oldham Council, our partners who have done a significant amount of work to come together and try and use public funds in the best way, and of course to residents who I believe have been extremely understanding of the pressures that the council faces and the very difficult position the council finds itself in. But within all that, they found it in themselves to really get behind what we're trying to do for Oldham. And I think that should be respected and reflected back. But the council chamber does reflect that staff who work for this authority today are going through a very, very difficult and unnerving time. They don't know what the next few years will bring, but they are going in to work day in, day out to provide an excellent service on behalf of people of Oldham. So my last contribution is just to thank them all for all that they do. Oldham would not be the place it is today without the hard work and dedication of our staff.
Thank you, Councillor McMahon. And now the Chief Executive will take a recorded vote. Could you please speak loud and clear, and then she knows whether you voted for or against. This is the original motion, which is now the substantive motion, and I think you all know that, so you just say for or against.
Councillor Akhtar. Councillor Alcock. Councillor Ames. Councillor Azad. Councillor Ball. Councillor Marie Bashforth. Councillor Steve Bashforth. Councillor Batty. Councillor Blythe. Councillor Briggs. Councillor Brownridge. Councillor Amanda Chatterton. Councillor Olwyn Chatterton. Councillor Chauhan. Councillor Dawson. Councillor Dean. Councillor Dearden. Councillor Dillon. Councillor John Dillon, sorry. Councillor Philomena Dillon. Councillor Fielding. Councillor Gary. Councillor Hack. Councillor Harkness.
Could people, if they want to dose, wait till they get home?
Councillor Harrison. Councillor Heffernan. Councillor Hibbert. Councillor Hindle. Councillor Hoole. Councillor Iqbal. Councillor Jabbar. Councillor Judge. Councillor Larkin. Councillor Malik. Councillor McCann. Councillor MacDonald. Councillor Claren. Councillor McMahon. Councillor Moores. Councillor Price. Councillor Cumer. Councillor Ruffley. Councillor Salamat. Councillor Sedgwick. Councillor Shah. Councillor Sheldon. Councillor Shuttleworth. Councillor Stretton. Councillor Sykes. Councillor Thompson. Councillor Torr. Councillor Uraman. Councillor Williams. Councillor Williamson. Councillor Wrigglesworth.
Because it's been a full and frank debate, and I feel the Mayor should support a legalised budget, and I therefore am going to support it as the Mayor. I think that's the right and proper thing to do. So I declare the motion for the budget carried by 42 for and 14 abstentions.
13.
13 abstentions, sorry. It was the falling asleep that I must have miscounted. I declare the motion is carried, and I call on Councillor McMahon to move and Councillor Jabbar to second the medium-term financial strategy 2014-15, 2023-24. Councillor McMahon.
Move, Mr. Mayor. Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Does any member wish to speak? Councillor McMahon, do you want to write a reply or just no? All those in favour, please show. Anyone against? That's carried. Yeah, we're back on this. This isn't a recorded vote. Council must now vote on the resolutions detailed within the summons. Does the Council note the agreed council tax base for the year as agreed on the 27th of January 2014? And does the Council approve the council tax requirement for the Council's purposes? Are we going to vote separate? We're going to vote on the first one first. The resolution within the summons. All those in favour? Is there anyone against? It's carried. Does the Council now approve the council tax requirement for the Council's own purposes for 2014-15 as detailed within the summons? Does anyone wish to speak? I don't think they dare. Now, on this, we have to have a recorded vote, is that right? So, I'm sorry about this. This is one of the 5, I promise you, coming to your town soon. Right, back to the Chief Exec.
Okay, here we go. Thank you. Councillor Akhtar. Councillor Alcock. Councillor Ames. Councillor Azad. Councillor Ball. Councillor Bashworth, Marie Bashworth. Councillor Steve Bashworth. Councillor Batty. Councillor Blythe. Councillor Briggs. Councillor Brownridge. Councillor Amanda Chatterton. Councillor Olwyn Chatterton. Councillor Chauhan. Councillor Dawson. Councillor Dean. Councillor Dearden. Councillor John Dillon. Councillor Philomena Dillon. Councillor Fielding. Councillor Gary. Councillor Hack. Councillor Harkness. Councillor Harrison. Councillor Heffernan. Councillor Hibbert. Councillor Hindle. Councillor Hoole. Councillor Iqbal. Councillor Jabbar. Councillor Judge. Councillor Larkin. Councillor Malik. Councillor McCann. Councillor MacDonald. Councillor McLaren. Councillor McMahon. Councillor Moores. Councillor Price. Councillor Cumair. Councillor Rehman. Councillor Ruffley. Councillor Salamat. Councillor Sedgwick. Councillor Shah. Councillor Sheldon. Councillor Shuttleworth. Councillor Sykes. Councillor Thompson. Councillor Tour. Councillor Uraman. Councillor Williams. Councillor Williamson. Councillor Wrigglesworth. And Councillor Hudson.
4.
Thank you.
I didn't get the number. I was waiting for the number. They obviously slipped up, but it was, there's nobody against. It was unanimous and carried. So I think we can agree with that. And now we have to ask, does the Council agree that the amounts as detailed within the summons be calculated for the year 2014 in accordance with sections 31A to 36 of the Local Government Finance Act of 1992? And does any member wish to speak? Right, well, back to the recorded vote.
And I'll drop the councillor this time if you to speed it up. So, Akhtar. Alcock. Ames. Azad. Ball. Marie Bashworth. Steve Bashworth. Batty. Blythe. Briggs. Brownridge. Amanda Chatterton. Olwyn Chatterton. Chauhan. Dawson. Dean. Dearden. John Dillon. Philomena Dillon, Fielding, Gary, Hack, Harkness, Harrison, Heffernan, Hibbert, Hindle, Hoole, Iqbal, Jabbar, Judge, Larkin, Malik, McCann, MacDonald, McLaren, McMahon, Moores, Price, Cumer, Rehman, Ruffley, Salamat, Sedgwick, Shah, Sheldon, Shuttleworth, Stretton, Sykes, Thompson, Tor, Uraman, Williams, Williamson, Wrigglesworth and Hudson. Thank you.
There again, it's unanimous. And now the final one. This might seem a bit silly, but there is a purpose to it, I'm told. And I think it's just, democracy, so that if there's any legal challenges, we have done it the correct way. So we have got to put up with these things. So you can whinge all you like, I have to do it. Right. Does the council note that for the year 2014-15, the Police and Crime Commissioner for the Greater Manchester and the Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Authority have issued precepts to the councils as detailed in the summons? Are we doing these separate? Yes, separate. So we're back to the recorded vote.
No.
Because it says the council needs to note.
It's note. Says it noted.
So we just... Oh, we only have to note this.
That one.
So now, with the vote is, does the council...
Can the council note it? Is it noted? Is it noted?
Have you noted?
Yeah. No, agree.
Does the council agree to set the aggregate amounts as detailed within the summons as to the amount of council tax for 2014-15 for each part of its area and for each category of dwelling? Does any member wish to speak? Councillor McMahon. I nearly called you something else.
I've been called Worth, Mr Mayor, as you know. Just very quickly to thank the outside bodies for the work that they've done in keeping a cap on the increases that were due. Despite protests from across the chamber, the only reason why there was a council tax increase at all in Oldham last year wasn't because of Oldham Council. We actually took a decrease. It was because of the outside bodies. We spent a lot of time this year working with our colleagues on the outside bodies to be more reasonable. And of course, we reflect that the only reason the police have to increase it at all is because, one, the disproportionate cut they've had when they've taken money to the City of Westminster and other places, but also, of course, they can't make serving the police officers redundant and reflecting that. But to pass on thanks.
Right, now this is the final recorded vote, you'll be pleased to know. Does the council agree to set the aggregate amounts as detailed within the summons as the amount of council tax for 2014-15 for each part of its area and for each category of the dwelling?
Akhtar, Alcock, Ames, Azad, Ball, Bashforth, Steve Bashforth, Batty, Blythe, Briggs, Brownridge, Amanda Chatterton, Olwyn Chatterton, Chohan, Dawson, Dean, Dearden, John Dillon, Philomena Dillon, Fielding, Gary, Hack, Harkness, Harrison, Heffernan, Hibbert, Hindle, Hoole, Iqbal, Jabbar, Judge, Larkin, Malik, McCann, MacDonald, McLaren, McMahon, Moores, Price, Cumer, Rehman, Ruffley, Salamat, Sedgwick, Shah, Sheldon, Shuttleworth, Stretton, Sykes, Thompson, Tor, Uraman, Williams, Williamson, Wrigglesworth and Hudson. Thank you.
So there again, that's been carried unanimous. And I really would like to thank everyone for what has been, I think, a good debate and, for most part, well-natured and well-meaning. And I hope that this will continue, because I agree with the leader that we have to all work together for the benefits of Oldham. So I do sincerely thank you for all the work you do, whatever happens in the future, and hope you have a safe journey home, and say that concludes the business of the Oldham Council meeting. Thank you.